Many of us are familiar with youthful mistakes and doubts when choosing a life path. Something similar happened to the heroine of today's story, who could not define her own feelings. She was too young to realize how risky love triangles can be. Unfortunately, the girl did not have time to grasp this. Cayley Mandadi was only 19 years old, and she was a second-year student at Trinity University in San Antonio, Texas, USA. She was in a romantic relationship with a 22-year-old man named Mark Howerton. At the same time, Cayley found herself faced with a difficult choice, as in addition to Mark, she continued to maintain a connection with her ex-boyfriend Jet Bertram. Cayley had previously dated him, and even after meeting Mark, she wavered between these two young men for a long time. You can't even imagine how fatal this reckless love triangle turned out to be for her. On October 29, 2017, Cayley, along with her boyfriend Mark Howerton, attended the annual music festival in San Antonio. There, the lovers drank alcohol, smoked marijuana, and then mutually decided to make love in the car. After that, the girl unexpectedly passed out. Mark, noticing that she was not breathing, quickly put her in the car and rushed her to the nearest hospital. It seemed nothing unusual, right? But no, my dears, everything turned out to be extremely tragic. If you're interested in learning about this horrific incident, be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new videos. This will greatly support me as an author. The doctors made every effort, using various methods and equipment to save Cayley's life. Unfortunately, this was unsuccessful. The doctors were forced to declare the death of the 19-year-old cheerleader Cayley Mandadi due to the injuries sustained, and the girl had many injuries. When Cayley's mother first saw her daughter in the hospital, it even seemed to her that she had been hit by a train or a truck, or that she had fallen from a plane, so mutilated was the girl's body. There was practically no uninjured spot on her. When the victim was brought to the hospital, her condition was extremely serious. The doctors performed artificial respiration at least 7 times, and they managed to start her heart. However, each time after that, it unfortunately stopped. Cayley fell into a deep coma, so initially the doctors connected her to life support systems. The fight for the girl's life lasted 2 days, but eventually it became clear that Cayley's brain was dead. The doctors had to inform her parents that there was no hope for recovery. For this reason, the decision was made to disconnect the girl from the artificial ventilation system. Unfortunately, this tragic decision was the most difficult thing Cayley's parents could experience in their lives, but despite this, her relatives insisted that her last wish must be fulfilled. Cayley had always wanted her organs to be donated to save other people's lives in case of such a tragedy. Her mother was constantly in the ward, and until the very end did not believe in the reality of what was happening. But unfortunately, it was true. According to the forensic expert's conclusion, the cause of death was a traumatic brain injury. The deceased was found to have a fractured skull and elbow bone, resulting from blows with a blunt object. In addition, the cheerleader's body was so mutilated that her relatives simply refused to believe that a human being could have done such a thing. It rather seemed as though the girl had been in some terrible accident or was killed by a maniac. You know, in my practice I've seen a lot of bloody cases, but looking at the photos from the hospital, my blood just runs cold. Unfortunately, I can't show them to you due to YouTube's policy. This is a very sad case because at the time of the tragedy, Cayley had just turned 19. She was a second-year student at Trinity University, where she studied public relations. Cayley was a bright, popular, and respected girl in the university's female community. She was a cheerleader, easily made friends, was sociable, and naturally fit into any company people were drawn to her. According to Cayley's best friend, the girl was interested not only in studying, but also in building her personal life and enjoyed entertainment. Her whole life was ahead of her. Immediately after entering the university, Cayley fell in love with her first boyfriend, Jet Bertram. He became her first and only truly strong feeling that she could not forget. The young people met in their first year. The guy was a talented athlete, and they immediately felt an attraction. The girl called him her dream and was incredibly proud of their relationship. However, in the opinion of the deceased's mother, it was a typical teenage love. The couple occasionally had arguments, and their feelings would flare up and die down with new intensity. By the second year, Cayley was already convinced that Jet shared her plans for the future to get married and have children. But then the girl began to realize that the guy took life too lightly and did not think about the future prospects. When Cayley became aware of this, she decided to move on. It was at this time that the girl met Mark Howerton. He did not study at Trinity University, but was visiting friends there. An immediate mutual attraction arose between Cayley and Mark. They got along wonderfully and started dating. But the girl was unable to completely break off contact with Jet. Thus, she effectively found herself in a relationship with two guys at the same time. This became her fatal mistake. Moreover, both young men knew about Kaylee's affairs. It seemed as though the girl had arranged some kind of competition or race where she intended to choose the better of them. But for obvious reasons, both guys were categorically against Kaylee's experiments and tried in every way to get her to make a final choice. But the young people did not have time to resolve this conflict. Literally a month after the second suitor appeared, the girl ended up in the hospital with injuries incompatible with life. He brought her there in his car around 10:30 p.m. on October 29, 2017. While the doctors were fighting for the victim's life, the police were already talking to 22-year-old Mark. For this, they took him to the most secluded place they could find in the hospital, the chapel there. According to Mark, the couple spent a weekend at the music festival in San Antonio, where they drank alcohol and smoked marijuana. The police found out that such a recreation scenario was a common thing for them. Further, as Mark reported, approximately between 5 and 6 p.m. they went for a ride in his Mercedes. During this trip, an argument flared up between the lovers. Kaylee confessed that she still had feelings for her ex-boyfriend Jet. Mark apparently tried to convince her to break up with her ex-boyfriend and stop any communication with his company. Eventually, he managed to calm Kaylee down, and she agreed to think about his words. Later, Mark continued. The couple stopped at a deserted parking lot near a gas station, where they engaged in intimate relations. According to the guy, their sex was rough. He claimed that he strangled the girl, slapped her in the face, but assured that Kaylee liked it. She enjoyed intense sensations. Despite numerous attempts by the police to latch onto the facts stated by Mark, he steadfastly stood his ground, claiming that everything happened by mutual consent. Was it really like that? Unfortunately, it turned out not to be so simple. Events unfolded not according to the usual scenario. As Mark reported, after sex, he and Kaylee talked for about 5 more minutes, and then the girl started complaining of a headache. But the guy did not attach much importance to it, attributing it to an excess of alcohol. When a few seconds later, Kaylee suddenly passed out and started snoring, Mark still did not sound the alarm. He allegedly decided to take the girl to his apartment in Houston because he thought she had just fallen asleep under the influence of fatigue, alcohol, and drugs. At some point, Kaylee stopped snoring and stopped showing any signs of life at all. That's when the young man became worried. Mark tried to feel for a pulse, but it seemed to him that there was none, and he did not notice any breathing. Only after that did the guy rush to the hospital. Mark claimed to be extremely worried, concerned about Kaylee's condition, and hurried to try to save her life. The detectives who began investigating this incident had no doubt that the girl's horrific body condition was the result of a vicious attack. They interrogated Mark several times, but there was nothing to latch onto. The only inconsistency that immediately caught the eye was the indication of where the car was located. At first, Mark reported that he and Kaylee had spent time at a gas station, and then admitted that they had driven to a deserted parking lot behind it. But in general, these details did not compromise him in any way. The guy did not confess to the murder, and there was a lack of concrete evidence against him. So Mark was released without being charged, although of course he remained the prime suspect. After all, no one believed his story. It was obvious that the girl had been brutally abused before her death. The situation changed radically only after 3 months when the full report of the forensic expert arrived. In the opinion of the specialist, Kaylee died as a result of blunt facial and head trauma, so everything that happened was reclassified as intentional murder. On this basis, on February 28, 2018, Mark was arrested and charged with kidnapping, murder, and rape. However, even then, the young man did not admit his guilt, and later he was even released on bail until the start of the trial. It would seem obvious the girl was last with Mark, so he should be held accountable. But the deeper the police delved into the details of the investigation, the more thoroughly they studied the identity of the suspect and the circumstances of the victim's life, the more they revealed a whole tangle of tragic mistakes, fatal coincidences, and misunderstandings that ultimately led Kaylee to the forensic expert's table. Mark's relatives and friends immediately hired a lawyer for him to defend the innocent young man in their opinion. The lawyer was convinced that the young man was being unfairly held accountable. The lawyer believed that the charges were the result of the negligence and bias of the investigation. In his view, Mark was not involved in the assault, and the cause of the girl's injuries could have been an ordinary fall at the music festival or 2 vigorous efforts by doctors during attempts to save her life. The police's work was significantly complicated by the fact that the officers were unable to find anyone who witnessed what happened, despite the fact that everything took place at a crowded concert. The suspect's lawyer insisted that his client could not have committed such a brutal crime because his behavior did not generally correspond to that of a typical murderer. Instead of trying to cover up the evidence and dispose of the body, Mark himself took the victim to the hospital in an attempt to save her. Of course, the defense tried in every way to create as positive an image of their client as possible. Unfortunately, as the prosecution later discovered, an incredibly experienced and influential lawyer was working with the suspect. It was not until December 2019, a full 2 years after the tragedy, that Mark stood trial for the murder of Kaylee. From the prosecution's point of view, on October 29, 2017, the defendant forcibly dragged the student into his car, effectively kidnapping her from the music festival. Then he drove her to a deserted parking lot behind a gas station. It was there that Mark, enraged by the argument and jealousy of the other guy, brutally abused Kaylee, beating her, raping her, until the girl experienced a brain hemorrhage that caused irreversible consequences. When the victim stopped showing any signs of life, the young man became scared and tried to rectify the situation by getting to the hospital. He really hoped that the doctors would be able to save Kaylee. However, in the opinion of the lawyer, this version of the accusation was flawed from beginning to end, starting with the moment of kidnapping and ending with the beatings and rape. The defender appealed to the fact that the prosecution did not have a single direct witness who could confirm the kidnapping, who saw the girl being forcibly placed in the car and taken away from the festival venue. The defense put forward the assumption that the active attempts to save Kaylee's life and the intensive resuscitation measures by the doctors could have been the cause of the bruises and other injuries on her body. It was known that the doctors performed indirect heart massage on the girl at least 7 times before realizing the futility of these efforts. Unfortunately, the only person who could confirm or refute Mark's version was dead, and although the lawyer's version about the infliction of injuries by doctors sounded extremely doubtful, the prosecution had to rule out all unlikely scenarios claimed by the defense, and for this, witnesses were needed who could shed light on at least some part of the events of that tragic evening. First of all, the investigators interviewed the paramedics who were on duty at the ambulance and were the first to start rescuing the student. Their crew was standing in the parking lot near the emergency room, waiting for the next call. Suddenly, a car stopped behind them with a wild screech of tires. The driver, waving his arms in panic, called for help. It was Mark Howerton. He quickly led the paramedics to his car and showed them the unconscious Kaylee. Mark begged them to save the girl, who had allegedly stopped breathing. When the doctors looked into the car, their vigilance only grew. Naked Kaylee was lying in the car. Her pants and t-shirt were on the floor. The girl showed no signs of life, and her body was covered in bruises. Even on the inside of her thighs, there were characteristic finger imprints. Kaylee was barely breathing, and her pulse was faint, so the doctors immediately began resuscitation measures, artificial respiration, indirect heart massage. A detailed examination of the victim was out of the question at the time her life was at stake. These testimonies of the doctors completely refuted Mark's lie that the bruises appeared on Kaylee only after she arrived at the hospital, allegedly from 2 intense resuscitation attempts. After all, everyone who saw the girl during her arrival at the hospital unanimously stated that hematomas had already covered her entire body at that time. Moreover, several witnesses drew attention to Mark's strange appearance. His fists, according to those present, were dirty and red, as if the guy had been fighting with someone for a long time before bringing Kaylee to the hospital. It later turned out that Mark was quite muscular and athletic, and he took steroids to increase his muscle mass. And this excessive preoccupation with anabolic steroids, according to his acquaintances, began to provoke sudden mood swings, outbursts of aggression, and uncontrolled fits of rage in the young man. Such a steroid effect could explain the brutal assault on Kaylee that evening. The girl may have inadvertently provoked her boyfriend's anger with a careless word or gesture. At first, Mark cooperated quite willingly with the investigation, even allowing his car to be inspected without a warrant. In the car, detectives found a gun and drugs. The defense skillfully used these circumstances to the benefit of their client. The lawyer argued that no one guilty of a serious crime would be so openly cooperative with the police. However, the prosecution quickly saw through this cunning move by the suspect. In their opinion, Mark was deliberately pretending to be innocent and assisting the investigation in every way to deflect any suspicion from himself. The police continued to pressure the guy, and eventually it paid off. They managed to find out that Mark had previously shown aggression towards Kaylee. A few weeks before the tragedy, one such conflict ended with a police call. At that time, Kaylee simply fled from her enraged boyfriend, who nearly beat her in the dorm. When the law enforcement officers arrived in response to the call, They saw that the room was turned upside down, broken furniture, a smashed laptop, scattered belongings, clothes in the trees outside the window. According to neighbors, Mark caused a terrible mess, but Kaylee then withdrew her complaint and asked not to disclose the details. Kaylee's friends said that after that incident, the couple's relationship seemed to have ended. Kaylee did not want to even talk to Mark and ignored his calls, but later the former lovers reconciled. During the court hearing, the prosecution demonstrated the couple's personal correspondence. The context of the messages made it clear that Mark reacted very painfully to any hints about a possible breakup. For example, in one of the photos, he was holding a gun to his temple and threatening to kill himself if Kaylee did not call him. Thus, Kaylee found herself drawn into an extremely dangerous and morbid love triangle. The girl did not dare to completely break up with Mark, fearing that he really might commit suicide, and at the same time, she could not give up her feelings for the other guy, her ex-boyfriend Jet. Kaylee herself repeatedly confessed to her friends that she was in love with both of them, which made it so difficult for her to make a choice. At the trial, the prosecution argued that on the eve of the tragedy, in October 2017, Kaylee finally decided to break this oppressive bond. It was about this that she informed Jet during the festival. The girl wanted to break up with Mark right after the concert, and until then, she stayed close to him to protect herself from possible aggression in a crowded place. However, as soon as the lovers found themselves alone, the jealous Mark, according to the prosecution's version, forcibly dragged the girl into the car and drove her to a deserted place, where he brutally assaulted her. Unfortunately, the key witness in this case was supposed to be Jet Bircham, Kaylee's other boyfriend. And indeed, during the first court hearing, it was thanks to his testimony that the prosecution had grounds to accuse Mark of kidnapping, rape, and murder. But very quickly, the defense managed to discredit Jet's testimony. As it turned out, he was not actually an eyewitness to the kidnapping. Jet did not see firsthand how Mark forcibly put Kaylee in his car, although he initially claimed that he had personally witnessed this. This all came to light when the lawyer started cornering the guy, asking him why he did not rush to the girl's aid if he had witnessed the violence. In reality, Kaylee and Mark had disappeared from Jet's sight even before that moment. He could not have witnessed their departure, and he was relaying second-hand information, although he was unable to name those people. All of this gave the defense grounds to accuse Jet of false testimony and dealt a devastating blow to the prosecution's case. Their main witness now looked extremely unreliable, which undermined confidence in his words. In addition, during the trial, photos of drugs, suspicious contacts, and correspondence were found on Jet Bircham's mobile phone. This gave grounds to suspect the guy of drug abuse and involvement in drug distribution. It later turned out that at the time of Kaylee's death, her ex-boyfriend was on probation. He had previously been arrested for selling marijuana, and among the youth of San Antonio, Jet had a reputation as a well-known dealer. The defense conducted a harsh cross-examination, and at some point, Bircham began to evade answering questions, citing his constitutional rights. For a guy who had cooperated with law enforcement and received immunity from criminal prosecution in exchange for his testimony, such behavior seemed extremely strange. It seemed as though he was afraid of exposing himself in some dubious dealings that were unrelated to Kaylee's case. Additionally, Mark's lawyer managed to find out that Jet had previous legal problems. Shortly before the incident with Kaylee, he had been expelled from the university for harassing another student who had filed a police report. At that time, Jet was able to settle the conflict by promising to voluntarily leave the educational institution, so the defense openly pressured the jurors, portraying Jet as a real scoundrel, a drug dealer, harasser, and liar. Who would believe such a witness? But the prosecution did not give up. In order to dispel any doubts about the causes of Kaylee's death, the prosecution brought in several independent experts. The forensic experts came to an unambiguous conclusion: the head trauma that caused the massive brain hemorrhage and ultimately the girl's death could in no way have been sustained as a result of her short stay in the hospital, as the defense had insisted. The lawyer's version that Kaylee had allegedly fallen and hit her head after being hospitalized sounded completely absurd. The girl had lost consciousness even before arriving at the clinic, so all the efforts of the doctors were aimed precisely at trying to revive her. So it was highly unlikely that they would have allowed someone to strike the patient so hard that she sustained a fatal traumatic brain injury. However, several experts brought in by the defense suggested that some of the bruises on the victim's body could have appeared as a result of her preparation for organ donation, a procedure that Kaylee herself had insisted on while still alive. Based on data about the nature and location of the injuries, forensic experts used 3D modeling to recreate the circumstances of the attack on the girl. These materials clearly demonstrated to the jurors that Kaylee's death was undoubtedly the result of a brutal beating, not an accident or medical negligence. The results of the toxicological examination were also a significant argument for the prosecution. The analysis of Kaylee's blood showed a high content of psychoactive substances that increased blood pressure and, consequently, the risk of internal bleeding and rupture of blood vessels. Therefore, Mark's defenders appealed to this fact, saying that with such a cocktail in the body, even a minor head injury could have provoked a fatal brain hemorrhage, which is what happened to the girl. However, the prosecution insisted that this was a case of intentional murder. After all, neither an accidental fall nor a medical error could explain the broken nose, split lip, bruises on the neck, and other characteristic injuries that eloquently testified to the girl's brutal beating. Eventually, after intense and lengthy debates between the parties, the jurors retired to the deliberation room to render a verdict. Just a few hours later, the defense received a shocking phone call. An unexpected witness contacted the lawyer, claiming that he had seen Kaylee's condition during her hospitalization. It was a duty nurse from the emergency room where the girl ended up. He assured them that when Kaylee was first brought in, there were no bruises on her body. In his opinion, that the hematomas could have arisen from internal bleeding due to prolonged cardiac arrests and measures taken to prepare the body for organ removal. Such testimony could have completely cleared Mark Howerton of the charges, but as the judge explained to the lawyer at this stage, it was no longer possible to involve new witnesses. The jury's deliberations lasted more than 10 hours. For 2 days, they were unable to reach a consensus. The court was unable to satisfy the thirst for justice of the deceased girl's relatives. The jurors proved unable to render a unanimous verdict regarding the defendant's guilt. As a result, the court was forced to declare the previous trial improper and schedule a retrial. Despite this interim result, both sides stated that they were ready to continue defending their positions. The defense planned to seek a complete review of the case, including due to Jet Bertram's dishonest testimony and the appearance of a new witness. As for Kaylee Mundy's parents, despite everything, they had no doubts about Mark's guilt. They were determined to continue seeking to hold their daughter's abuser accountable, and very soon their hopes were fulfilled. The prosecution refiled charges against Mark Howerton. In June 2023, a new trial began. This time, it was held behind closed doors without access for the press or outsiders. So many details remained unknown to the general public. Initially, in 2018, the young man faced life in prison. But during the retrial, the qualification of the crime and the measure of punishment were somewhat mitigated. Now Mark was charged with assault under aggravating circumstances, which carried a sentence of up to 20 years in prison. At this stage, the prosecution brought in a new expert, a specialist in domestic violence. He vividly depicted Mark's psychological portrait to the jurors as a classic abuser, a jealous owner who sought by any means to cut off Kaylee from all contact with the outside world, intimidated her, humiliated her, threatened her, and eventually could not restrain himself and crippled the girl in a fit of rage. In the expert's opinion, the 19-year-old Kaylee, due to her young age and inexperience, simply did not realize who she was dealing with and what danger she was in. As in the previous trial, a heated discussion about the nature of Kaylee's injuries unfolded in the courtroom. The defense was still unable to involve the new witness in the case, that same nurse who allegedly saw the girl's condition before the bruises appeared. Therefore, the prosecution's version turned out to be more convincing. Eventually, despite all the objections and attempts to play on the jurors' sympathies, Mark lost. He was found guilty and sentenced to the maximum term of 20 years in prison. Such is the sad and instructive story of Cayley Mandadi. A very young, inexperienced girl, blinded by love, failed to notice that her chosen one was a dangerous and unpredictable type. The one who swore to love and protect her turned out to be a real monster, and it cost Kaylee her life. Let this tragedy serve as a warning to all of us. Be cautious and careful in relationships. Do not ignore warning signs. Remember, if someone truly loves you, they will never express their feelings through rudeness, control, threats, or blackmail. These are signs of an unhealthy relationship that you need to get out of immediately. Unfortunately, Kaylee and her relatives did not attach importance to these red flags. The girl believed that she could tame her chosen one's evil temper and appealed to his common sense. But someone who is used to pressuring and intimidating rarely stops on their own. That is why victims of violence should seek help as soon as possible. Nowadays, in the USA, as in many other countries, there is an entire system to protect and support victims of domestic abuse. Crisis centers, hotlines, community organizations operate. The police, courts, and social services are all called upon to protect the vulnerable and prevent such tragedies. This story took place in 2007 in the Italian city of Perugia, where Amanda went as part of a student exchange program. Amanda settled into an apartment with 3 other girls, including British student Meredith Kircher. Initially, everything was going well. Amanda was learning Italian, making new friends, and working at a local bar. She was a typical student who wanted to gain new experiences and enjoy life in another country. But on November 1, 2007, a tragedy occurred that would forever change Amanda's life. Her roommate Meredith was found dead in their shared apartment. The girl was partially undressed, with deep cuts on her neck. It was clear that this was a brutal murder. The police immediately launched an investigation and began searching for possible suspects. Unfortunately, their attention quickly focused on Amanda and her boyfriend, Rafael Solicito. Investigators found some evidence that, in their opinion, pointed to the couple's involvement in the crime. This was the beginning of a long and complicated case that lasted many years and attracted worldwide attention. Amanda found herself at the center of the scandal and was accused of brutally murdering her friend. Her life turned into a real nightmare. There are many controversial moments and ambiguous facts in this case. Various pieces of evidence were presented, some of which raised doubts about their reliability. Testimonies were often inconsistent and confusing. Public opinion was divided. Some believed in Amanda's guilt, while others considered her an innocent victim. There are still many details and twists ahead in this story. We will learn more about Amanda's personality, the course of the investigation and the trial, the role of the media and the public in this case. We will try to figure out what really happened on that terrible night and whether the verdict was fair. So let's unravel this tangle of mysteries and riddles together, step by step. Perhaps we will be able to find answers to some questions and understand what Amanda Knox's true role was in this tragic story. So, let's learn more about Amanda Knox before she found herself at the center of this high-profile case. Amanda was born on July 9, 1987, in Seattle, Washington, USA. She grew up in an ordinary American family, not particularly standing out from her peers. From childhood, Amanda showed an interest in learning different languages and cultures. She was an active and sociable girl who easily made new acquaintances. At school, Amanda was particularly interested in literature and foreign languages, which later influenced her choice of future profession. After graduating from high school, Amanda entered the University of Washington, where she began studying Italian. It was this fascination with Italian that became one of the main reasons why she decided to go to Italy to study. Amanda devoted her university years not only to studying, but also to actively participating in student life, joining various youth communities and interest groups. In 2007, Knox learned about a student exchange program that allowed her to spend a whole year in Italy. She immediately decided to take this opportunity and chose the city of Perugia as her destination, one of the oldest university centers in Italy, known for its rich history and culture. For a young girl who wanted to improve her knowledge of Italian and immerse herself in an authentic environment, Perugia seemed like the perfect place. Before leaving for Italy, Amanda had already earned a reputation as a diligent student and an active participant in university life. She not only studied well, but also found time for social activities and volunteering. Amanda participated in various student clubs, especially those related to the study of foreign languages and intercultural exchange. Amanda's interest in Italy was not limited to language and literature. She was fascinated by Italian art, cuisine, and traditions. Amanda dreamed of seeing the masterpieces of Italian artists with her own eyes, tasting real pasta and pizza, and communicating with locals. She was confident that a year in Italy would be an unforgettable adventure for her and would help not only improve her language skills, but also better understand herself and the world around her. Unfortunately, fate had completely different plans for Knox. What was supposed to be a year of dreams turned into the worst nightmare of her life. No one, including Amanda herself, could have imagined the ordeals that awaited her in Perugia and how one tragic event would forever change her fate. So this was Amanda Knox before finding herself at the center of the most high-profile criminal case of the decade. An ordinary girl from an ordinary American family who just wanted to study, develop, and explore the world. She had no idea that very soon her name would be on the front pages of all the world's newspapers, but for far from pleasant reasons. In the summer of 2007, she finally arrived in the long-awaited Perugia, a small but incredibly picturesque city in the heart of Umbria. Amanda settled into a cozy apartment that she shared with 3 other girls, including British student Meredith Kircher. Meredith, like Amanda, came to Italy on a student exchange program. It would seem that the two young foreigners had a lot in common: young age, love of travel, desire to learn about another culture. At first, the girls got along well, sharing impressions of their new life and making plans for the future. Nothing foreshadowed trouble. The first weeks in Perugia were a real fairy tale for Amanda. She immersed herself in the local student life, attending lectures at the university, participating in various events, meeting new people. Amanda continued to improve her Italian not only in classes, but also in live communication with locals. Her energy, openness, and genuine interest in everything new helped her quickly adapt to life in a foreign country. To have her own pocket money, Amanda got a job at the Le Chic Bar, which was owned by Patrick Lumumba, a native of Congo. This job gave her the opportunity not only to earn a little money, but also to delve deeper into the atmosphere of the city and meet different people. It was at this bar that Amanda met her new boyfriend, a young Italian named Raffaele Solicito. It seemed that everything was going as well as possible. But despite the carefree first months, Knox had to get used to some peculiarities of life in Italy that differed from the American way of life she was used to. A different culture, a different rhythm of life, different rules of the game, all this required some effort and time to adapt. But Amanda, with her curiosity and love of life, gladly accepted these challenges. However, fate was already preparing completely different trials for Amanda. On November 1, 2007, her roommate Meredith Kircher was found brutally murdered in their shared apartment. This tragedy came as a real shock to everyone and completely turned Amanda's life upside down. From a carefree student, she instantly turned into the main suspect in a terrible crime. Thus began a long and complicated story that would define Amanda Knox's fate for years to come and make her name known all over the world. A story full of riddles, contradictions, and unexpected twists. A story about how a dream can turn into a nightmare, and an ordinary life can turn into a courtroom thriller. What really happened on that fatal night? Was Amanda really involved in the murder of her friend? The answers to these questions were sought for many years, and we will return to them more than once. On November 1, 2007, in the apartment in Perugia where Amanda Knox lived with other female students, a terrible tragedy occurred. Meredith Kircher, one of Amanda's roommates, was found dead in her room. Her body was covered with numerous wounds, and deep cuts were visible on her neck, indicating an extremely brutal murder. This shocking event not only stunned the entire student dormitory, but also shook the entire local community. Perugia, known for its calm and safe university town atmosphere, suddenly found itself in the spotlight due to one of the most high-profile crimes in Italian history. The police immediately launched an investigation. The main task of the first days was to reconstruct the picture of events on that fatal night, to understand what exactly happened in the apartment and who could have committed such a brutal murder. Investigators began questioning everyone who was in any way connected with Meredith, primarily her roommates, including Amanda Knox, and very quickly, the attention of the police and the public focused on Amanda. Why? Because some details in her behavior and testimony aroused suspicion. For example, there were certain inconsistencies in her stories about where she was and what she was doing that night. The police were also alerted by Amanda's unusual, in their opinion, reactions to what had happened. In addition to Amanda, her boyfriend, Italian Raffaele Solicito, also fell under suspicion. Investigators collected some evidence that, in their opinion, pointed to the couple's possible involvement in the crime. In particular, during a search of Raffaele's apartment, a knife was confiscated on which traces of blood were found, and on the bra of the murdered Meredith, experts found Raffaele's DNA. These findings later became some of the key pieces of evidence for the prosecutions. However, as it turned out later, the investigation also had significant shortcomings. Many experts criticized the methods of collecting and processing physical evidence, pointing out the possibility of their accidental or intentional contamination during investigative actions. This called into question the reliability and admissibility of some of the evidence. Meanwhile, the case was gaining more and more publicity. A real media frenzy erupted around the investigation. The media around the world began closely following every move of the police, relishing the details and putting forward their own versions of events. Against the backdrop of this unhealthy interest and constant pressure, Amanda and Raffaele found themselves at the center of a real storm that mixed real facts with speculation and rumors. This atmosphere of public hysteria and bias created very difficult conditions for conducting a fair and impartial investigation and trial. And although at that time no one knew how this story would end, it was clear that it would not be an easy walk for any of the participants. Thus, the tragic death of Meredith Kercher marked the beginning of one of the most complicated and controversial criminal cases in modern history. A case that became a real test for the justice system and raised more questions than it gave answers. And although we now know its finale, believe me, the path to the truth was very long and winding. On November 6, 2007, just a few days after the brutal murder of Meredith Kercher, Amanda Knox and her boyfriend Rafael Solicito were arrested. This step by the Italian police was the result of the evidence collected, which investigators considered convincing enough to bring charges. Among this evidence were certain discrepancies in the suspects' statements regarding their whereabouts and actions on the night of the murder. The police also referred to some physical evidence found at the crime scene that allegedly pointed to Amanda and Rafael's involvement in this tragedy. In addition to them, Patrick Lumumba, the owner of the bar where Amanda worked, was also arrested. The reason for his arrest was a mention of him in one of Amanda's first statements. However, she later claimed that she gave this testimony under pressure from the investigators. The case instantly attracted enormous attention from the international community. At the center of this media storm was Amanda Knox, a young American who, in the eyes of the public, turned from a gifted student into the main suspect in a brutal murder. The media dubbed her Foxy Knoxy and began to portray her as a cunning and dangerous person. This biased presentation of information further complicated an already difficult case. The trial began in 2008. Prosecutors presented their version of events. According to their theory, Amanda, Rafael, and another man, Rudy Ged, a native of Ivory Coast who had already been convicted of this crime in a separate trial, committed the murder of Meredith during some kind of perverted sex game that got out of control. The prosecution relied on physical evidence from the crime scene and the suspects' testimonies, which contained many inconsistencies and strange details. On the other hand, Amanda Knox's lawyers insisted that her initial confessions were obtained under duress, and all the evidence against her was collected in violation of procedure and could have been contaminated during processing. The defense also emphasized that Amanda's DNA was not found on key pieces of physical evidence, such as the murder weapon. In addition, the defense subjected the methods of conducting the investigation and the entire Italian justice system to scathing criticism, claiming numerous violations of the suspect's rights to a fair trial. Meanwhile, the public was divided in its assessments of this complicated case. A significant part of Italian society was inclined to believe in the guilt of Amanda and Rafael. On the other hand, in the USA, the prevailing opinion was that the young people were being unfairly persecuted and that the real perpetrators of this terrible crime were not the ones on the dock. These contradictory judgments and polarity of opinions created an extremely tense atmosphere around the trial. It seemed that finding the truth in this tangle of mutually exclusive facts and conjectures would be extremely difficult. And although at that moment the finale of this drama was not yet known, it was clear to everyone that a long and exhausting struggle lay ahead for Amanda, Rafael, and their loved ones. The trial of Amanda Knox and Rafael Solicito was a real test for the Italian justice system. It took place under the close attention of the world media and was accompanied by fierce public debates. The focus was on the evidence collected by the prosecution, as well as how this evidence was presented and interpreted by prosecutors and lawyers. The prosecution placed particular emphasis on several key elements. Firstly, the presence of Rafael Solicito's DNA on the clasp of the murdered Meredith Kercher's bra. Prosecutors argued that this finding was irrefutable proof of Rafael's presence at the crime scene at the time of the murder. Secondly, the investigation emphasized the mixed DNA samples of Amanda and Meredith found in the bathroom of their shared apartment. These traces, according to the prosecution, indicated that Amanda was present during the attack on Meredith or immediately after it and tried to cover up the traces. Thirdly, the prosecutors painted a rather unflattering psychological portrait of Amanda Knox. They portrayed her as a cold, calculating, and manipulative person. To support this characterization, they cited evidence of Amanda's strange and not entirely adequate behavior in the first days after the murder. Her alleged inability to show empathy and emotions that would befit an innocent person in such a tragic situation. On the other hand, Amanda and Rafael's defense built its strategy on questioning the reliability and admissibility of the collected evidence. Lawyers argued that in the process of collecting and analyzing physical evidence, significant violations were committed that could lead to their accidental or intentional contamination. And this, accordingly, made such evidence unreliable and unsuitable for use in court. Another important argument of the defense was the unreliability of Amanda's initial testimony. Her lawyers claimed that this testimony was obtained as a result of long and exhausting interrogations conducted without the participation of a lawyer and an interpreter. Under such conditions, according to the defenders, Amanda could break down and provide false testimony that did not correspond to reality. In addition, Knox and Solicito's lawyers drew attention to the absence in the case file of a clear motive that could explain why young people who had no problems with the law suddenly decided to commit such a brutal murder. The defense insisted that the prosecution had failed to provide a convincing answer to this question. It is also important to note the role of the media in this high-profile case. The media closely followed every day of the trial, relishing the smallest details and often taking one side or the other. Some publications openly sympathized with the prosecution, portraying Amanda as a cunning and immoral person. Others, on the contrary, sympathized with the defendants and criticized the actions of the prosecutor's office and the court. Such media bias further fueled passions in society and created additional difficulties for the administration of impartial justice. Thus, the trial of Amanda Knox and Rafael Solicito turned out to be a real battlefield between the prosecution and the defense, where each side tried to present its version of events and convince the jury of its rightness. This confrontation was accompanied by active media intervention and close public attention, which only increased the tension and drama of the situation. And although at that time no one knew how this story would end, it was clear to everyone that it would not be an easy walk. This decision caused a considerable resonance both in Italy and abroad, especially in the USA, Amanda's homeland. Many Americans were shocked and outraged by this verdict, considering it unfair and biased. In the States, calls began to be made for a review of the case, and Amanda herself turned into almost a symbol of the fight against an imperfect justice system. The case gained not only wide public attention, but also a political coloring. American high-ranking officials, including then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, expressed concern about the fate of their compatriot and called on the Italian authorities to ensure a fair consideration of the appeal. Amanda Knox's story sparked heated debates in Italian society about the state of the criminal justice system, investigative methods, and the problem of the arbitrariness of law enforcement. Many were outraged by how ineptly and tendentiously the police and the prosecutor's office worked, how easily they rejected evidence that did not fit into their version, and how peremptorily they imposed their point of view. For Amanda Knox herself, this story had very serious and dramatic consequences. Even after the final acquittal, it was very difficult for the girl to return to a normal life and get rid of the stigma of a murderer. Her name will forever remain inextricably linked with this high-profile and controversial case. In order to somehow mitigate the negative consequences of what happened, Amanda wrote an autobiographical book and also actively got involved in the work of organizations that help people who have been unjustly convicted or accused of serious crimes. She seeks to draw society's attention to the problems of miscarriages of justice and investigative arbitrariness, warning that anyone can end up behind bars due to an imperfect system. One of the most striking aspects of the Amanda Knox case was the unprecedented media coverage it received. It seemed that the whole world, with bated breath, was following every twist and turn of this detective story. Particularly close attention was paid to the figure of Amanda herself, a young American woman who found herself at the epicenter of this storm. It must be admitted that the media played an extremely ambiguous role in this story. On the one hand, they performed their usual function informing the public about the course of events. But on the other hand, in pursuit of sensationalism and ratings, many media outlets openly speculated on this topic, fueling hysteria and stirring up emotions. The tabloids, both Italian and British, were especially zealous. They quickly stuck the label Foxy Knoxy on Amanda, hinting at her alleged cunning and ability to manipulate people. This image of a sexually liberated, immoral American woman was firmly entrenched in the mass consciousness and undoubtedly greatly harmed Amanda. In general, the media often exploited cliches and stereotypes, contrasting depraved American culture with traditional values of Italian society. Amanda was portrayed as the embodiment of all the vices of modern youth: selfishness, irresponsibility, promiscuity. And Italian justice, accordingly, looked like a bastion of morality and order. Of course, such pressure from the media could not but affect the atmosphere around the trial. It created additional pressure on judges and jurors, because everyone understood that millions of eyes were closely watching their every word and gesture. In such conditions, it was extremely difficult to remain impartial and objective. Public opinion on the case was divided. In Italy, many were inclined to the version of Amanda and Raphael's guilt, believing that the 2009 verdict restored justice. They say the arrogant American was quite rightly punished for a terrible crime. On the other hand, in the United States, sympathies for Amanda prevailed. Most Americans were convinced that their compatriot had become a victim of a biased and incompetent investigation, that she was convicted on the basis of circumstantial evidence and speculation. It is not surprising if the Knox case quickly acquired a political coloring. And although Amanda and Raphael were eventually acquitted, this story had serious and long-term consequences. In particular, it forced the Italian authorities to think about the need for reforms in the criminal justice system. After all, it became obvious that the current procedures for collecting and evaluating evidence are far from perfect, and the rights of suspects and accused are often violated. At the same time, the Knox case gave impetus to a discussion about ethical standards in journalism. Many experts pointed out the unacceptability of such irresponsible and biased coverage of high-profile criminal cases. After all, media pressure and whipping up hysteria seriously affect public sentiment and can push the court to make politically motivated decisions. One cannot fail to mention the cultural impact of the Amanda Knox case. Based on these events, many books were written, several documentaries and feature films were made. Each such work offered its own interpretation of what happened, placed its own accents and evaluated the characters in its own way. In general, this story left a deep mark on the collective memory and continues to influence the image of Italy, especially in terms of the impartiality and professionalism of its justice system. There is no doubt that interest in the Amanda Knox case will not fade for many years to come, because it has become the embodiment of the eternal human drama, the clash of good and evil, truth and falsehood, justice and prejudice. In December 2009, an Italian court found Amanda Knox and her then-boyfriend Raphael Sollecito guilty of the murder of British student Meredith Kercher. Amanda was sentenced to 26 years in prison, Raphael to 25 years. It would seem that a line had been drawn under this high-profile case. But in reality, everything was just beginning. The fact is that the verdict caused considerable indignation and protests both in Italy and abroad, especially in the United States. Many believed that the court was biased and the evidence unconvincing and contradictory. Under pressure from the public and the efforts of the defense team, a retrial was scheduled in 2010. And in 2013, what supporters of Amanda and Raphael had been waiting for so long happened. The appellate court heeded the arguments of the defense and agreed to reconsider the key evidence in the case. In particular, independent experts were called in who seriously questioned the reliability and admissibility of some of the physical evidence presented by the prosecution. It turned out that in the collection and storage of this evidence, significant violations were committed that could lead to their accidental or deliberate contamination. That is, it could not be said with certainty that, for example, the DNA of the suspects on certain items got there precisely during the commission of the crime and not got there through the negligence of the investigators. This expert testimony was decisive. In October 2011, the appellate court overturned the conviction and declared Amanda Knox and Raphael Sollecito not guilty of the murder of Meredith Kercher. They were immediately released from custody, and Amanda was finally able to return home to Seattle. But even with that, the case did not end. The prosecution appealed the decision of the appellate court to the Supreme Court of Cassation of Italy, and in March 2013, this court unexpectedly overturned the acquittal and ordered a retrial. This turn of events shocked many and caused a new surge of public outrage. However, during the new appellate process in 2014, the prosecution again failed to provide compelling evidence of Amanda and Raphael's guilt. Finally, in March 2015, the Italian Supreme Court upheld their final acquittal and closed the case. This time forever. After all these dramatic events, Amanda Knox returned to the United States and tried to start a new life. However, as you can imagine, it was very difficult for her to do this. She will forever remain a person whose name is inextricably linked with one of the loudest and most controversial trials of our time. Knox did not hide from this burden. On the contrary, she decided to use her experience and popularity to draw attention to the problems of the criminal justice system. She began to actively advocate for reforms, give interviews, and write books. Her case has become a kind of symbol of a miscarriage of justice and a call for greater caution and responsibility in the investigation and consideration of criminal cases. In general, this story left us with many lessons. It showed how important it is to strictly adhere to procedural norms when collecting and using evidence. How powerful and dangerous the influence of the media and public opinion on the course of a trial can be, and how difficult it is to correct a miscarriage of justice if it has already occurred. The Amanda Knox case will forever go down in history as an example that even the loudest and seemingly obvious accusations can sometimes turn out to be false, and that the right to a fair trial and the presumption of innocence must be reliably protected under any circumstances. Radical ideologies often cross the line of common sense, causing their followers to lose touch with reality. It's even worse when the victims of manipulation sincerely begin to believe in the illusions imposed on them. One example of the tragic consequences that blind faith in destructive ideas can lead to occurred in Sweden, a country that has always been considered one of the safest in the world due to its extremely low level of violent crime. In the small Swedish village of Björnberg, on July 27, 1971, a boy named Helge Fossmo was born into a family that was not particularly religious. He became one of 5 children in the family. Despite the lack of religious upbringing, at the age of 12, Helge independently became interested in the church and joined a local youth religious group, becoming one of its most active participants. Although his parents did not share their son's enthusiasm, they did not hinder him, believing that it was not the worst occupation for a teenager. According to Helge himself, it was from the moment he joined the church community that his life acquired true meaning, and he found a kind of salvation in faith. For the next 5 years, the young man completely devoted himself to religion, constantly attending church services and participating in various church events. In 1988, fate led Helge to a cafe for Christian youth, where he met his future wife, Helen Johansson. The young couple got married as soon as they came of age and settled in the town of Bordenberg. The couple had 2 children, and Helge continued to delve into religious issues, becoming a preacher in the local community. However, in 1993, a fateful meeting took place that radically changed the life of Helge and his family. The man met Asa Waldau, a charismatic leader of a Christian sect known as the Bride of Christ. Asa came from the tiny town of Knutby, where her teachings originated, with the intention of opening a branch of her church in Bordenberg. Knutby is such a small settlement with a population of about 700 people that there is only one store, one restaurant, a church, and a few dozen wooden houses scattered among the forest. It would seem that in such a cozy corner, there is no place for evil. But it was here at that time that people lived who later committed 3 horrific murders that overshadowed the crimes of many serial killers in their scale and cruelty. Asa traveled from town to town, preaching her teachings and recruiting new followers, especially among young people. She masterfully manipulated people's minds, urging them to give up everything worldly and devote their lives to serving her church. Helge's family turned out to be an ideal target for the ambitious Bride of Christ. Helge's first meeting with Asa did not go quite smoothly. The devoted Christian expressed doubts that a woman could be a pastor. However, thanks to her remarkable manipulative abilities, Asa managed to convince the Fossmo family to join her sect, not suspecting what tragic and irreversible consequences this would lead to. Skeptical of Asa's radical views and methods, especially after realizing her affiliation with the sect, Helge initially rejected the idea of joining the Bride of Christ community. However, the ambitious preacher did not give up. She was interested in attracting the young Fossmo couple to her ranks, so she acted cautiously and methodically. Over the next 4 years, Asa gradually gained the trust of Helge and Helen, convincing them of the safety of her church's activities. At the same time, she promoted her own teachings, which increasingly captivated Helge. Eventually, in 1997, the couple agreed not only to join Asa's community, but also to move to the town of Knutby, where her church was located. At first, the move was presented as an ordinary, friendly visit. Asa showed the young family her church from the inside, told them about its activities and goals. Gradually, she increasingly gained the attention of her new followers, criticizing the shortcomings of the traditional church, which eventually sowed a seed of doubt in Helge's mind. A significant part of the residents of Knutby already belonged to Asa's religious community and were involved in various areas of the church's activities. The organization provided work for everyone who wanted it, and almost every member of the community had their own responsibilities, often related to religious service. This brought people together who knew each other well, supported and protected their own. The community gladly accepted the new preacher Helge and his family into their ranks. Having become a pastor of the church in Knutby, Helge quickly drew attention to himself with unconventional motives in his sermons. He often spoke on taboo topics such as sex and death, interpreting them rather dubiously. Despite the fact that not all parishioners shared the radical approach to the interpretation of Scripture, Helge relentlessly pursued his mission. 2 years after the move, the Fossmo family had their third child, which increased the burden on the parents. They decided to hire a nanny, Sarah Svensson, who had recently moved to Knutby, inspired by Asa's teachings. Sarah had grown up in a deeply religious Christian family, but from childhood suffered from severe allergies, which limited her life. The girl was cared for by her mother, with whom she had a very close relationship. But at the age of 11, Sarah lost her mother due to a long illness. This event devastated the girl, turning her into a troubled teenager who often ran away from home. After his wife's death, the entire burden of raising his daughter fell on the father. Despite all his efforts, the man could not fully replace Sarah's mother, although they also had a close bond. The girl stayed with her father until she accidentally met Asa during her travels around the cities in search of new followers. Their acquaintance took place at Bible courses and quickly grew into a close friendship. Sarah turned out to be an ideal candidate for recruitment into the sect. For the experienced manipulator Asa, it was not difficult to discern the girl's vulnerable spots and skillfully use them to lure her into her community. Eventually, Sarah decided to move to Knutby to be closer to the church and comprehend the ways that Asa preached. During this period, Helge became closer to Asa than ever before. They spent a lot of time together, not only delving into the study of Scripture. This couple claimed to receive divine messages, which they interpreted as prophecies. Helge diligently wrote down these revelations in his diary, describing in detail the visions, sensations, and their interpretation. One of these records stated that God named Helge the King of Kings and Asa the Queen of Heaven. According to the pastor, he appeared in the world even at the time of the creation of the world, and since then had been waiting for a meeting with an equal being, Asa. The woman, in turn, insisted that she should marry Helge, because their union would elevate the alternative religion to an incredible height. Both unreservedly believed in these ideas. In 1999, they arranged a kind of sacrament, the wedding ceremony of Helge and Asa. The man gave her a ring with 7 diamonds, because this number has a sacred meaning in many faiths. And all this despite the fact that Helen was still the official wife of the pastor. Of course, such a course of events caused unbearable jealousy on the part of Helen, which led to a rift in her relationship with her husband. Then Asa intervened. She criticized the young wife for jealousy, calling this feeling the most shameful for a true Christian. The sect leader insisted that Helen should change her attitude, otherwise the community would find a way to create serious problems for her, in particular, to take away the house. The intimidated woman was forced to come to terms. The relationship between Helge and Asa took on an increasingly strange hue. Despite the fact that the pastor was still officially married, he hardly engaged with his family, spending all his time with Asa. This became especially noticeable after their sacrament. The woman constantly showered him with love and praise, attaching him to herself more and more. Asa skillfully used Helge's devotion not to build a strong relationship, or even to separate him from his wife. Her only goal was to establish complete control over the man. Acting insidiously and effectively, she quickly achieved her goal. Helge found himself completely dependent on her. Asa knew everything about him, and sex, which they constantly engaged in, became the most powerful weapon of manipulation. At the same time, the sect leader convinced the pastor that he could literally embody Jesus. All these absurd ideas multiplied like a snowball, and the behavior of Helge and Asa became more and more outrageous and abnormal. Neither Helen, nor the children, nor other members of the community could influence this situation. Given Asa's manipulative nature, tensions in the Knutby community grew steadily, portending inevitable tragedy. In December 1999, the town was gripped by an epidemic of illness, which did not spare the Fossmo couple. Confined to bed by illness, Helga and Helen were forced to transfer most of the household chores to nanny and housekeeper Sarah Svensson, who miraculously escaped infection. On the morning of December 18th, despite feeling unwell, the couple had breakfast together, after which an exhausted Helgi decided to lie down to rest. Having fallen fast asleep, the man heard a knock at the door through his dream. Upon waking up, he found that his wife was nowhere to be found. It turned out that a concerned neighbor had come to their house, who had not heard any news from the couple all day. Helge assured the neighbor that everything was fine, but he insisted on seeing Helen. The woman did not respond to loud calls, although she definitely had to be at home. Remembering that his wife was going to take a shower, Helgi became worried about her long absence. The men decided to check what had happened. Since Helen did not respond to her name, they had to break the lock with a screwdriver. In the overflowing bathtub, they found the lifeless body of a woman floating face down. The door was locked from the inside, and Helen was still wearing the nightgown she had worn at breakfast. Helgi's eerie scream attracted the attention of several neighbors who ran to the house. Together, they pulled the body out of the water and tried to perform cardiopulmonary resuscitation, but it was too late. 27-year-old Helen was pronounced dead. The autopsy revealed that the deceased woman had a serious head injury that could well have been fatal. The forensic expert suggested several possible causes of death. Obviously, the resulting traumatic brain injury could lead to loss of consciousness and, as a result, drowning of the young mother. Even more questions were raised by the results of a toxicological examination, which revealed an extremely high dose of opioids in the victim's blood. According to calculations, this amount of drugs would be enough to kill Helen, but the woman never took any drugs. Despite all the signs of a possible murder, law enforcement officers classified this case as an accident. They concluded that Helen slipped, fell, and hit her head on the faucet. Sarah Svensson's testimony played an important role in this, confirming every word of the pastor that his wife was alone in the bathroom and no one could kill her. Helgi appeared grief-stricken and sincerely saddened by the loss of his beloved wife. However, those who knew him more closely noticed some strange changes in the behavior of the widower. In particular, he almost immediately got rid of all the things associated with Helen and never mentioned her again, even forbidding the children to talk about their mother. Some suspected that Helen's death was not an accident, but that the unwanted wife was simply gotten rid of so that she would not interfere with ambitious plans. In addition, it became known that the man personally influenced the conclusion of the forensic medical examination. At first, Helgi, citing religious beliefs, demanded that an autopsy not be performed at all, but he was refused due to the suspicious circumstances of the death. Then the preacher insisted on removing information about the presence of opioids in the blood of the deceased from the conclusion. He explained his demand by the desire to minimize the likelihood that his wife could have committed suicide, because it is a sin because of which her soul will not go to heaven. With these dubious actions, Helge allegedly sought to protect Helen's memory and the reputation of his family from shame. Suddenly, during this period, Asa lost interest in Helga. Their stormy romance was cut short when she once again went on a pilgrimage and decided not to return. Unfortunately, the charismatic leader managed to thoroughly brainwash the pastor, who was filled with determination to continue on the path of the sect. Despite the ostentatious grief and tears, Helgi very quickly found a new love in the person of Asa's sister, Alexandra Waldau. The relationship between the lovers developed rapidly, greatly facilitated by Helga's high status. At that time, many considered him a person close to God, so they treated him with great respect, which also bribed Alexandra. Already in the spring of 2000, she moved into the pastor's house and soon they got married. However, even a new marriage did not curb Helga's sexual appetites. One woman was always not enough for him, so already in the spring of 2001, he began to actively court the nanny of his children, Sarah Svensson, who still worked in his house. The girl readily accepted signs of attention from such a respected man. Their relationship even received a blessing from the sect leader Asa Waldau. By the time these events unfolded, Helga's relationship with Alexandra had deteriorated. Nanny Sarah, who became the pastor's lover, tried to support him in solving family problems. Helgi cynically took advantage of the girl's sympathy, often inviting her to pray together in the church. During these prayer meetings, the man often inclined Sarah to intimacy, insisting that this had nothing to do with satisfying carnal desires, but was a kind of spiritual union and a message to God. So strong was Sarah's belief in Helga's righteousness that she willingly believed these stories and even felt some kind of divine inspiration at such moments. The girl sincerely believed that she was doing a godly deed, although in fact she fell into the trap of a skilled manipulator who covered himself with spiritual values, having goals far from religion. Shortly after the beginning of this relationship, Helgi began to voice increasingly contradictory statements. At first, he declared that the Lord was waging his battles on earth, and the pastor himself was his warrior. According to Helgi, this mission was not easy, because sometimes it was necessary to remove various obstacles along the way. The man spoke in riddles, and the naive Sarah, who perceived her lover's sermons as divine revelations, willingly believed everything. In fact, Helgi was gradually probing the ground for the implementation of his insidious plan. Later, the pastor began to tell that during sex, God sends him important messages about the fate of his second wife, Alexandra. Helgi interpreted these signs as a portent of her imminent death. Brainwashing Sarah, he claimed that the Lord had shown him the ideal life companion, herself, the nanny. Moreover, Helgi intimidated the girl by saying that he himself could die if his marriage to Alexandra was not dissolved. Although during this period their union was falling apart at the seams, the pastor could not get a divorce due to strict church rules. Like all the women in Helga's entourage, Sarah was enchanted by his stories. With these bizarre messages, he gradually led the nanny of his children to commit a terrible act. The skilled manipulator managed to firmly tie the victim to himself, using his authority in the church and knowledge of Sarah's vulnerabilities. Helgi adopted many techniques of such control from Asa, and now willingly put them into practice. At that time, many people seriously considered the pastor to be the person closest to God, so it was not difficult for him to persuade the nanny to his side. According to Helgi, the girl had to help the Almighty in the battle with demons, for which she needed to move in with him, despite the fact that he was still living with Alexandra. The women lived in different rooms, and Helga had sex with both of them every night in turn, each time justifying it as a fight against evil spirits. The pastor called intimate relationships a ritual of purification from defilement. His eloquence allowed him to convince his mistresses that he was a messenger of heaven, and in this way opposed the enemies of the Lord. These peculiar three-way relationships lasted until 2003, although Helgi already wanted to get rid of Alexandra, with whom he allegedly broke up, but could not officially divorce. During this period, the manipulation of Sarah reached its apogee. For the most part, Helgi turned to her only for sex, and the rest of the time he insulted her, calling her a sinner and an arrogant blonde. But each time he ended the emotional torture with the phrase, "I love you." The girl was so happy with these three words that she stopped paying attention to all the insults. She was willing to do anything to earn the favor of the chosen one of God, a fighter against demons, not even noticing how, along with this, she was losing her own will, turning into a puppet in the hands of a dangerous man. Against the backdrop of problems with his second wife, Helgi repeatedly asked his mistress if she was ready to kill in the name of the Lord. If earlier Sarah hesitated with the answer, now, it seemed, she reacted more calmly, and the pastor felt that he would soon be able to persuade her to do it. The girl replied that she was not ready, but resisted much weaker than before. Then, to push Sarah on the true path, Helgi created a new account in the messenger and began sending her messages from an unknown number. trying to convince her that it was God himself who wanted to contact her. In these creepy correspondences, the girl was told that she had little time left and she had to kill in the name of the Lord no later than November 25th. When Sarah suspected that Helge was behind these messages, he angrily denied his involvement, once again shaming his mistress, accusing her of a lack of faith and sinfulness. Unfortunately, it worked as it had before. Afterward, the pastor began sending Sarah messages that she should become part of the divine plan, sending human souls to heaven. This alleged God claimed that for her, this was the only way to salvation. Helge's manipulations and intimidation led Sarah to begin to fear for her soul and dare to commit a crime. On November 8, 2003, she broke into the pastor's house and attacked his wife Alexandra, who was sleeping in her bed. Sarah hit her with a hammer, but the woman miraculously managed to survive and fight off the attacker. The reason for the attack was a message that Sarah allegedly received from God via messenger. It contained an order to immediately kill the preacher's wife. Oddly enough, the criminal escaped punishment, probably due to Helge's insistence not to report the incident to the police. Indeed, no record of this event was found in the law enforcement database. Instead of punishment, the pastor expelled his former mistress to live with her own father. However, this did not affect Sarah's correspondence with God in any way, which only fueled her terrifying confidence in the need to kill. Shortly after these events, Helge found a new passion, a neighbor, Annette Lind, who at that time was married to a man named Daniel. Having decided to get rid of a competitor, the preacher began sending messages to Sarah, manipulating her in the same way as before. The frightened girl, seeking salvation, again agreed to take up arms. This time, Sarah prepared more thoroughly. She bought a pistol and even researched on the internet how to make a homemade silencer. Following the instructions of the Almighty, she hoped for success and the liberation of her soul. On January 10, 2004, at 3:30 in the morning, Sarah, keeping in touch with Helge, drove up in her father's car to the area where the pastor lived. Having parked 500 meters from the house, the killer put on a black mask and put on shoes of different sizes to throw the police off the trail. Entering through the unlocked door, the lock of which the organizer of the crime broke in advance, staging a robbery, Sarah crept into the room of 23-year-old Alexandra, who was sleeping soundly. Having shot first in the thigh and then, when the victim woke up and screamed, in the head, the criminal killed the woman. At 4:30 in the morning, Sarah went to the house of the second victim, Daniel, the husband of Helge's new mistress. The pastor knew that the man was left alone that night and told Sarah about it. The doors were locked, so the girl just knocked. When 30-year-old Daniel opened the door, she shot him in the chest without hesitation, and when he fell, once more in the head. Fleeing from the crime scene, Sarah did not suspect that the second victim had survived. Daniel managed to get to the phone and call for help. Arriving at the call, the police found him conscious, so he was able to describe the attacker. At that moment, 32-year-old Helge was already at the crime scene, allegedly trying to help his neighbor. Helge accompanied the wounded Daniel to the hospital, where he learned about the murder of his wife Alexandra. The pastor again began to play the role of a grief-stricken husband. The description of the attacker provided by Daniel was rather confusing due to the mask on her face. Gradually, attention focused on Helge and Sarah. One of the neighbors, whose brains had not yet been washed, recalled similar strange circumstances of the death of the pastor's first wife. Information also surfaced about the hammer attack on Alexandra, during which she nearly died at the hands of Sarah. The bloody fingerprints found at the scene of Alexandra's murder and on the door of Daniel's house became irrefutable proof of the 26-year-old nanny's guilt. Sarah was immediately arrested. At first, she insisted that she acted independently, without anyone's prompting, and then began to claim that she committed crimes in the name of God. During a search of Sarah, a phone was seized, where Helge's number and another unknown subscriber were found. Although no correspondence with the Almighty was found on this device, the detectives came across a call from Sarah's old number. Thorough searches of her house revealed another mobile phone, which stored more than 1,000 text messages with God. These messages contained intrusive manipulation and incitement to murder. After tracking the unknown number, the investigation led to the pastor of the local church. Learning about this, the disappointed Sarah, who sincerely believed in the divine origin of the correspondence, told the police the whole truth. The wounded Daniel's wife, Annette Lind, was also suspected of complicity and arrested, but 2 weeks later, she was released without charge. During the trial, the arrogant Helge denied his involvement and showed no remorse. A psychiatric examination found him sane. The scale of the manipulations was staggering. Having sufficient evidence, the prosecutor's office proved Helge's guilt in inciting the murder of Alexandra and the attempt on Daniel's life. In July 2004, the pastor was sentenced to life imprisonment with the right to parole after 24 years. Despite several appeals that were rejected, Helge will only have a chance for early release in 2028. He was also accused of involvement in the death of his first wife, but was acquitted due to lack of evidence, although the prosecutor is convinced of his guilt. In 2007, while in prison, Helge married for the third time. The identity of his new wife remains unknown. During an interview in August 2006, the imprisoned pastor admitted his involvement in the murder of Alexandra and the attack on Daniel, claiming that several other people were involved in organizing the crimes. However, the case was never reopened. Currently, Helge Fossmo is serving his sentence in the maximum security prison Tidaholm in Sweden. At the trial, a video was shown with a reconstruction of the crime, where Sarah spoke in detail about what she had done. A private investigation revealed that the court was shown an edited version, while the original 6-hour recording contained discrepancies with the actual details of the crime. In interviews with journalists, Sarah adhered to the false reconstruction of events. This raised doubts about the true course of events and the identity of the main culprit. It was assumed that the murderer could be the pastor himself, who shifted the responsibility to Sarah. Sarah Svensson, recognized as insane, was placed in a psychiatric hospital. In 2011, after completing treatment, she was released, as doctors considered her safe for society. In 2020, sect leader Asa Waldau was convicted on 8 counts of assaulting former parishioners and sentenced to community service. The woman changed her last name, moved, and withdrew from church affairs. Thanks to the efforts of doctors, Daniel survived the attack but refused to return to the city, fearing the local church and sectarians. Another pastor of the same church, Urban Feld, was convicted of sexual exploitation of persons dependent on him. Several women from the community whom he called his daughters and manipulated. The moral of this chilling story is that blind faith and fanaticism can lead to terrible consequences, especially when manipulated by ruthless and charismatic individuals. The tragedy in Knutby demonstrates how religious beliefs, taken to extremes, can cloud the mind and push people to the most terrible acts. The main tragedy of this story was not only the murder of Alexandra and the attempt on Daniel's life, but also the ruined lives of all those who fell under the pernicious influence of Pastor Helge Fossmo. Sarah Svensson suffered the most, a young girl who, due to naivety and gullibility, became a toy in the hands of an experienced manipulator. Her sincere faith was cynically used to achieve selfish goals, which led to irreparable consequences. To protect yourself from such situations, it is necessary to always maintain critical thinking and not allow anyone to manipulate your consciousness, even if it is a spiritual leader. You cannot blindly trust authorities and follow instructions that are contrary to morality and common sense. Faith should be a conscious choice, not an instrument of control in the hands of other people. It is important to remember that true religion brings love, mercy, and forgiveness, not hatred, condemnation, and violence. Every day we hear about new cases of violence, and the statistics are simply shocking. Every 2 hours, somewhere in the world, a woman dies at the hands of a man. This problem affects each and every one of us, regardless of age, gender, or social status. The story we will discuss in this episode is a stark example of how the pursuit of quick money and ill-considered decisions can lead to fatal consequences. A young Italian woman found herself trapped after being tempted by easy cash. She had no idea that her life was about to be shattered and that she would become the victim of a horrific crime. Our story's heroine, Carol Maltese, was born in 1995 to a mixed Italian-Dutch family. Her mother, Giuseppina, was from Italy, while her father, Fabio, was from the Netherlands. Unfortunately, when Carol was still very young, her parents decided to divorce. Fabio moved back to his native country, while Giuseppina stayed in Italy to raise her daughter alone. It was a difficult challenge for the woman, as she had to work a lot, often far from home, to provide for her family. But despite all the hardships, Carol did not hold a grudge against her mother, understanding that she was doing everything possible for her sake. Carol grew up in the small provincial town of Sesto Calenda. From an early age, she displayed traits such as determination, decisiveness, and cheerfulness. Carol was a very active child. She took dance classes, loved horseback riding, and dreamed of traveling. In addition, she had a knack for learning languages and knew several foreign ones at a young age. But the girl's greatest passion was books. She could spend hours immersed in the world of literature. Despite all her talents and hobbies, Carol sometimes suffered from excessive boastfulness. But thanks to her openness, sincerity, and optimism, she easily made friends and attracted the attention of those around her. In 2015, the young Italian woman entered a technical university. It was during this period that her life underwent dramatic changes. She fell in love and became pregnant by her boyfriend. Despite her young age of 20, Carol decided to have the child, even though the pregnancy was unplanned. She sincerely believed that she would be able to cope with her new role as a mother. However, reality turned out to be much more complicated than expected. After giving birth to her baby in 2016, the young mother faced numerous difficulties. The child's father was also not yet financially stable, but despite all the hardships, the young couple was determined to cope with the challenges of family life. In an attempt to improve their situation, Carol, her boyfriend, and their young son moved to Verona, a larger city where they managed to find work. During this period, Carol got a job as a sales consultant in a shoe store. It seemed that life was gradually improving, and the young family, although not without difficulties, was coping with all the troubles. But already in 2019, another twist occurred in Carol's fate. She unexpectedly fell in love with another man and, for several months, led a double life until the truth was revealed. Her betrayed boyfriend, the father of her child, decided to end the relationship, and Carol herself, who had long dreamed of change, supported this decision. Carol sought to start a new life with her beloved, who was living with his parents at the time, so she decided to temporarily leave her son with his father to give herself time to adapt and find ways to ease their fate. In addition to her personal problems, during this period, Carol's mother was suffering from a neurodegenerative disease that was rapidly progressing. Carol tried to spend as much time with her as possible, but already in February 2020, the world was shaken by a pandemic that hit European countries particularly hard. Italians, including Carol, found themselves in a very difficult situation. The lockdown made it impossible to work, move freely, and live a normal life. Due to the forced isolation, Carol faced serious financial difficulties. She could not even send money for her son's upkeep. This situation pushed the young woman to search for new ways to earn money. At first, she tried to launch a YouTube channel where she would share her experience of surviving under severe restrictions. Carol hoped to make money from advertising, but she quickly realized that it was a long and unrewarding path that was unlikely to bring her significant funds. Then Carol turned her attention to the OnlyFans platform, which seemed much more promising. Under the pseudonym Charlotte Engel, she began experimenting with creating explicit photo and video content. The first attempts brought in decent money, so Carol continued this activity, gradually moving towards increasingly daring material. In fact, Carol enjoyed what she was doing on the OnlyFans platform. However, this industry also had a flip side. When the girl's entourage learned about her new activity, many friends decided to break off relations with her. Carol herself considered such behavior unfair and called it nothing but prejudice. She sincerely believed that the world of explicit content was a kind of art form, and that Italy was simply lagging behind other countries in terms of progressive thinking. For Carol, it was obvious that most people visit such sites and view photos and videos of a spicy nature anyway, so she saw nothing wrong with her job. Gradually, Carol gained considerable popularity on OnlyFans, and she began to be invited to shoot adult films. Carol agreed to such offers without any hesitation and even participated in relevant performances. In interviews, Carol explained that she did not plan to devote her entire life to this. She already had certain projects for the future, but for now she was enjoying what she was doing and saving money to make her dream come true. At the same time, Carol began to publish posts on social media filled with indignation. The judgmental attitude of others towards her new job forced her to talk about the psychological pressure and constant moral condemnation she faced because of her activity. Carol defended women's right to freely choose their field of employment. Despite understanding that her work was unconventional for most people, Carol felt that she was being undeservedly humiliated for her choice. But public condemnation was not the only problem the woman faced. Her new boyfriend, for whom she had divorced her child's father, also had a negative attitude towards her passion. The situation escalated, and eventually the couple decided to part ways. At the age of 25, Carol found herself at a crossroads again and moved to the small town of Riscaldino, a suburb of Milan with a population of about 15,000 inhabitants. Here she tried to break with her dubious activity and got a job in a perfume store. But soon Carol returned to filming and quit her new job. It was in Riscaldino that fate brought Carol together with 42-year-old Davide Fontana, a banker and a rather well-known personality. The man actively ran his own culinary pages on social media, where he shared his knowledge about the history of haute cuisine and demonstrated his own achievements in this field. In addition, David was passionate about high-tech and photography, not traditional photography, but explicit photo shoots. As it turned out, Fontana had been married for many years and had a stable, loving relationship with his wife. But with the help of the internet, he realized another passion. He was looking for attractive girls who were willing to participate in spicy photo shoots. That's how he met Carol in November 2020. The man was enchanted by this girl, and soon a relationship developed between them. Despite the fact that Davide was married, he offered Carol sex for money, and she agreed. After some time in such a relationship, the banker realized that he had developed real feelings for his mistress. In March 2021, he confessed his infidelity to his wife and insisted on a divorce, exchanging a stable relationship for a fleeting affair with a young girl. At the same time, David deceived his wife by telling her that his new passion was named Deborah. Apparently, he was afraid that his wife would want to find Carol and take revenge on the family wrecker. One way or another, the couple began to live together, and their relationship became truly close. Davide helped Carol with the filming of explicit photos and videos, receiving a portion of her earnings in return. Carol turned into a celebrity in this industry and began to receive contracts from other countries. Her boyfriend knew that she was filming adult movies where she had sex with other men and participated in public performances. However, he seemed not to be bothered by this. But in reality, David was quite a jealous man, although this did not extend to Carol's work. Sometime after the beginning of their relationship, Carol's ex-boyfriend approached her and suggested renewing their connection. When Fontana found out about this, he became enraged. He was afraid that the young beauty would leave him for a guy her age, so he decided to take action. The man repeatedly called his rival and threatened him, even though Carol herself had refused her ex. David's jealousy reached its peak when he began to threaten Carol's ex-boyfriend, who tried to rekindle their relationship. Unknown individuals punctured the tires on the rival's car twice, and although Fontana's involvement could not be proven, his threats made him the prime suspect. Meanwhile, Carol's popularity on social media was growing rapidly. She already had over 30,000 followers on her pages. Carol traveled a lot, filming content in the Czech Republic and the Netherlands. In addition, she fulfilled individual orders received in private messages. For a considerable amount of money, Carol brought to life in front of the camera scenarios sent by clients. In the fall of 2021, a new man appeared in the heroine's life, a colleague from adult films, Salvatore Galda. Real feelings flared up between them, and soon Salvatore gave Carol an engagement ring and later proposed to her. Carol agreed to marry him, but now the question arose of how to get rid of Davide. Life with the banker had become unbearable for Carol. She no longer loved him, dreaming of another man with whom she was secretly meeting. At the same time, Fontana continued to take part in her activities, taking a percentage from each video he helped with. The business was thriving, bringing the girl considerable wealth. She had earned enough to afford not to work. In Carol's immediate plans was a return to Verona to be closer to her son. She continued to perform live at private parties and special events related to the adult industry. But at the beginning of 2022, the woman suddenly disappeared from the radar, ceasing all activity. Only occasionally did she respond in writing to messages from friends and family. Posts on social media also became infrequent. It seemed that the once active Carol had lost interest in her projects. Loved ones began to worry as this situation lasted for about 2 months. Carol did not talk to anyone on the phone and did not answer calls. To all questions, she replied that she was busy with household chores, looking for housing in Verona, and establishing a relationship with her child. Later, Carol reported that she was going on vacation to Dubai. Carol's worried friends contacted David, but he admitted that their relationship had ended and he had no idea where to look for the missing woman. This whole situation looked extremely suspicious, and soon it became clear why. On March 20th, 2022, a man who was walking along the picturesque cliffs in the village of Borno noticed strange large black garbage bags from the height of the ledge on the shore. They seemed half empty but heavy, as if filled with stones. Intrigued, the local resident descended to the mysterious objects, which felt unusual to the touch. Upon untying the first bag he came across, the man found a human hand inside and immediately called the police. The carabinieri, who arrived at the top of the slope, immediately noticed that the bags had been thrown from the cliff. Because of this, they had been torn on the rocks, which could have damaged the contents. A total of 4 bags were found with 18 parts of a mutilated body. From the very beginning, it became obvious that the remains had been deliberately disfigured to make identification difficult. The victim's face was so distorted that it was impossible to recognize her without additional laboratory analysis. The flesh had been cut from some body parts as if on purpose. As for the condition of the remains, the killer was apparently a hunter or a butcher. He skillfully dismembered the body, acting professionally and precisely, knowing where and how to cut. Before throwing the bags down the slope, the parts had been stored in the cold for a long time. Forensic experts suggested that they had simply been dumped from a freezer right off the ledge shortly before a passerby stumbled upon the terrible find. Given the thorough approach and professionalism of the criminal, the police suspected that they were dealing with a serial killer. One of the investigators recalled a similar case in March 2005 when as many as 10 bags with the remains of 2 people were found nearby. The killer was caught then and put behind bars, but the handwriting was too similar, which led to the chilling thought that a maniac was on the loose. To get closer to solving the crime, it was necessary to establish the identity of the victim and find evidence. But the body was so mutilated that it was impossible to even determine the gender without additional analysis. A thorough examination in the laboratory was due. Meanwhile, a press conference was held, necessary to warn local residents. At that time, the carabinieri still did not know who the victim was. The gender had not yet been determined, but people were warned, and important witnesses who might have noticed something were sought. The cause of death also remained unknown. During this period, Forensic experts worked actively to provide answers to all these questions and delve into the gruesome details of the last minutes of the unidentified victim's life. Soon, they found out that they were dealing with a young woman about 155 centimeters tall with dark hair. Her nails were covered with purple nail polish, and several tattoos were found on her skin, 11 in total. But most of them turned out to be deliberately damaged by the killer. It seemed that attempts had been made to erase them, cut them off or tear them off along with the skin. Apparently, the criminal wanted to hide all traces that would help identify the victim, thereby complicating the investigation. The tattoos became an important clue for the investigators. Despite the fact that the authorities did not yet know the name of the deceased, the public was already informed that the victim was a woman. The police released a description of some of the surviving tattoos in the hope that someone would recognize their owner. But people remained silent. A forensic examination established that the death had occurred more than a month ago, and before the body was thrown from the cliff, it had been stored in a freezer for a long time. This information caught the attention of journalist Andrea Torelli, who was also the editor of a magazine. The man became fascinated with the mysterious murder and began to analyze all the available information. Based on the data collected, Andrea made a logical assumption. Firstly, the criminal was unlikely to want to transport the remains to such a remote provincial area. Most likely, he lived relatively close to where the body was found. Secondly, the journalist was convinced that the killer was familiar with his victim, which meant that she herself must have lived nearby. Of course, these were only guesses, but it was from them that Torelli began his investigation. A pertinent question arose in the reporter's mind. Why had there been no reports of a missing person who fit the description of the girl found? After all, more than a month had passed since her death. How did it happen that her relatives did not notice her absence and did not search for her? A breakthrough in the investigation occurred a week after the body was discovered, on March 26, 2022. A random witness contacted the police, claiming that he recognized the dead girl from Borno. He managed to identify her precisely thanks to the tattoos he had previously seen when Carol gave an interview under the pseudonym Charlotte. It turned out that the victim was an actress in adult films and actively maintained pages on social media. After comparing Charlotte's photos with her tattoos, the Carabinieri were convinced that it was indeed her. To obtain useful clues, the police released the deceased's pseudonym. Andrea Torelli continued his own investigation, delving into the details of the murdered woman's life. He found out that Carol had collaborated with 2 agencies at once. At the first film studio, they replied that she had not worked with them for a long time, did not answer calls or messages, so the management decided that she had simply left the business, as sometimes happens. They could not tell anything more interesting. At the second film studio, the journalist spoke with another actress from adult films who called herself a friend of the deceased. She provided the phone number used by Charlotte. Thanks to this data, it was finally possible to find out the victim's real name, Carol Maltese. Andrea Torelli tried to call the girl's cell phone number several times, but to no avail. Then he tried to contact her through a messenger. And, surprisingly, someone allegedly answered the text message, claiming to be Carol herself. The journalist, under the pretext of an interview about the life of an actress in this industry, tried to arrange a meeting with her. However, he received a rude refusal in response. Andrea understood that it was not actually Carol responding, but the likely killer. The reporter was persistent and tried to continue the dialogue, persuading the so-called Carol to record a voice message or talk on the phone. Having received another refusal, Torelli changed his tactics. He reported that the body of a girl with identical tattoos, like in Carol Maltese's photos, had recently been found. Therefore, he would like to talk and make sure that the actress was alive. The criminal probably did not know about the discovery of the body, and this news came as a real shock to him. Apparently, he was counting on the remains not being found for a long time, and then not being able to be identified. Fortunately, he was mistaken. The journalist continued the conversation insisting on at least a 3-second conversation. But after that, the interlocutor simply disappeared. He stopped responding and reading messages. The reporter was convinced that he had just communicated with Carol's killer. He had 2 options for action. First, he could publish this information in his magazine. The news would become a sensation and make him famous. Second, he could turn to the police so that detectives could verify the information themselves. But then he risked the possibility of a leak of information that other media would publish. Moreover, the journalist understood that his intervention could end badly. After all, now the killer was aware that he was being sought, and therefore could try to flee to another country, hide somewhere in Italy, or resort to radical measures, take his own life. Despite all the risks and potential harm he could cause to the investigation, Andrea could also move it forward, and he did the right thing by first contacting the police. On the 27th, Torelli went to the police station and handed over the collected information to the Carabinieri. And only after that did he write an article in his magazine, but he did not provide all the details, indicate the victim's real name, or mention his communication with the killer. However, even such an article had the effect of a bomb exploding. After talking with Andrea, the criminal was already on guard. He began to monitor the news, so he quickly realized that the investigation was progressing and approaching him. Gripped by panic, he decided to report the girl's disappearance to the police, apparently to deflect suspicion from himself. On the day the article was published, Davide Fontana and Carol's fiancé named Salvatore came to the police station together. They filed a missing person report for the girl. They were immediately invited into an office for questioning, which lasted until 4 o'clock the next morning. On March 28th, official publications from other media appeared in newspapers stating that DNA examination had confirmed the identity of the deceased. It was Carol Maltese. And the very next day, March 29th at 7:15 a.m., the Carabinieri again appealed to the public through the mass media. They reported that a 43-year-old man had been detained on suspicion of premeditated murder with aggravating circumstances. It turned out to be Davide Fontana, who had been nervous and confused in his testimony from the very beginning of the interrogation. At first, he claimed that he had not seen the girl for 2 years, but this, of course, was not true. In addition, it did not explain why the man decided to report the disappearance just a few days after her body was found. The investigators quickly managed to break the main suspect. Under pressure, Davide began to talk. According to him, on January 11th, he and Carol were filming a video commissioned by one of the fans of her work. The man admitted that it was a much more extreme recording than the ones the couple had made before. The customer asked to put a bag over Carol's head, tie her up, tape her mouth shut, and also beat her and hit her on the head with a hammer several times in the process. According to the script, Davide was supposed to torture the actress, and she voluntarily agreed to this. So the man started the actions on record. He dealt several blows to the head with a hammer and also beat the tied-up girl for a long time. When it was finally over and David removed the bag, it turned out that Carol was dying. She was still twitching in her death throes, so the killer, according to him, was worried that Carol was continuing to suffer. Allegedly wanting to relieve her from suffering, he took a kitchen knife and cut her throat out of mercy. From the suspect's confessions, it became known that instead of calling the police or an ambulance when Carol was dying, he first finished off his victim and then began to plan how to get rid of the body. For 3 months after the murder, he dismembered Carol's remains and stored them in a freezer. At the same time, the man used the murdered woman's cell phone, communicating with her relatives and friends through social networks and messengers. In this way, he maintained contact and created the illusion that Carol was alive. The criminal's testimony was confused and fragmentary. He often got confused and changed some details of the story. His entire story looked doubtful, and everything required careful verification. In the end, the detectives managed to recreate an approximate picture of what had happened. As it turned out, Carol really wanted to move to Verona to be closer to her son. Here, Carol planned to gradually end her career in the dubious industry. She no longer wished to take part in it, and strove to become an ordinary person. Carol intended to marry her boyfriend Salvatore. On January 8, 2022, she performed at the club for the last time, and on the 11th, she was going to shoot a commissioned video with Davide for the last time. The investigation established that the order came from a fake account created by the banker himself. In it, he described in detail the perverse video that Carol was supposed to shoot. The scene included tying up, taping the mouth shut, a bag over the head, beating, and a blow to the head with a hammer. During the process, the man was supposed to find out the password to the girl's cell phone from her. This was part of a script conceived as the highest manifestation of domination over a person. Carol agreed, not even suspecting that by doing so, she was giving her executioner the opportunity to kill her. Initially, they agreed that he would imitate all actions, without using force, and Carol would pretend to be suffering in order to avoid real injuries. Instead, Davide acted at full force, getting carried away and crossing all boundaries. Obviously, all this was planned in advance, so the crime clearly had an intentional character. As soon as Davide found out the password to Carol's phone, he deviated from the script and began to brutally beat the girl until he beat her to death with a hammer. For several days, the killer came to the filming location and looked at the lifeless actress, satisfying his sadistic needs. After that, the man went to a hardware store, where he bought a hacksaw, large scissors, an electric saw, and spare blades. The banker also ordered a large freezer and a brazier, using Carol's phone to do so. It was the brazier that caused the severe burns that the police found on her body. On January 14th, Carol was supposed to go to Paris with her boyfriend Salvatore, but Davide told him that Carol had contracted COVID and was self-isolating. The fiancé believed it, because many people in their circle were sick. He unsuccessfully tried to contact Carol under various pretexts, but Davide refused each time, referring to her poor health. The story of Carol Maltese's murder shook all of Italy. Davide Fontana, a banker and a celebrity in the culinary world, was arrested on March 29, 2022, on suspicion of premeditated murder with aggravating circumstances. It was he, as it turned out, who was the main person involved in this horrific case. Strangely, for 2 months, none of the girl's relatives or loved ones tried to get into Davide's dwelling to find out what had actually happened to Carol. This played into the hands of the killer, who calmly dismembered the body and hid traces of the crime, staging the illusion of his victim's life. According to him, Carol's phone did not stop ringing. Every day, someone from friends or relatives wrote a message or called. Occasionally, Davide even updated the girl's pages on social networks with pictures from her personal gallery. From her bank card, he made noticeable purchases and even paid for housing rent to maintain the legend that Carol was living a secluded life because she was being treated. After the interrogation was over, Fontana stated that he had tried to commit suicide by writing a statement about Carol's disappearance, but he could not do it because he was arrested. However, no one believed this, because for 3 months, while the man was enjoying the crime he had committed and hiding its traces, he had enough time for suicide. Court hearings in the Carol Maltese case began on November 24, 2022. The lawyer insisted on the version of unintentional murder. They say Davide got carried away with fulfilling the client's order and accidentally killed his beloved girl. But prosecutors convincingly proved that it was he who created the fake request for this cruel video, which means that the massacre was planned in advance. The password to the victim's phone also became known to the criminal not by chance. He wanted to buy time by responding on behalf of Carol and deceiving her loved ones in order to have time to get rid of the body. The prosecution believed that the motive for the crime could be jealousy or greed. Carol's relationship with Salvatore was developing rapidly. The couple was planning a wedding, and Carol was going to move out from Davide. For him, this meant the loss not only of a mistress, but also of the income he received from their joint filming. However, considering Carol's main occupation, regular sex with different men in front of the camera for money, the version about jealousy did not look too plausible. Davide never showed jealousy about the girl's work at several studios at the same time, But as soon as she decided to end her career and start a family with another man, he immediately killed her. A psychiatric examination showed that the accused was sane and fully aware of his actions. The verdict in this high-profile case was announced on June 12, 2023. Although the prosecution demanded life imprisonment, the judge decided that the killer's actions were not intentional in nature. Even the fact that the body was dismembered was not taken into account as an aggravating circumstance. As a result, Davide Fontana received a surprisingly lenient sentence, only 30 years in prison. In addition, he was obliged to pay compensation to the victim's 7-year-old son in the amount of 180,000 euros. He had to pay Carol's parents a total of another 100,000, and the father of her child 20,000 euros in compensation. Such a court decision shocked the Maltese family. Davide's involvement in similar murders in the past could not be proven. Journalist Andrea Torelli, who took an active part in this case, wrote a book about the course of the investigation. In it, he told in detail how his intervention helped expose one of the cruelest murderers in the history of Italy. Dear friends, here we have come to the end of this sad and instructive story. The tragic fate of Carol Maltese makes us think about many things: difficult life choices, the price of quick earnings, the importance of valuing one's own life and safety. Every person has the right to choose their own path, and we cannot condemn Carol for her decision to become an actress in adult films. But at the same time, we must understand that any profession has its risks. Just as a policeman is exposed to the danger of being killed by a criminal every day, work in the adult entertainment industry, unfortunately, can also be extremely dangerous. Carol's story is a bitter lesson for all of us. It teaches us that we should not make important life decisions hastily, guided only by the desire to make money quickly. Sometimes what seems like easy money can turn into a terrible tragedy. Before taking a serious step, it is worth stopping and thinking not twice but 3 times, to weigh all the pros and cons, to assess the possible risks and consequences. Of course, each of us dreams of financial stability and prosperity, but are money worth risking one's health, safety, and sometimes even life for? Isn't it better to earn less, but be able to enjoy every day lived, to feel protected and needed by one's loved ones? Let us be wiser and more prudent. Let us not allow greed and the desire for easy gain to cloud our minds. Let us not be afraid of hard and honest work. Let our path to success be longer but safer. Let us value every moment spent with family and loved ones, because no money can bring back a lost life. Justice in this world can sometimes be cruel and relentless. Davide Fontana, Carol's killer, received only 30 years in prison, too lenient a punishment for such a terrible crime. But can any term behind bars return a mother to a little son or a daughter to her parents? If only it were possible to turn back time and convince Carol not to take that fatal step. But what happened, happened. Now we can only learn important lessons from this tragedy and live on, not repeating others' mistakes. Let Carol's death be a reminder to each of us. Life is priceless and fragile, so cherish it and do not subject it to unjustified risk. In conclusion, I want to address all of you, dear viewers. Thank you for being here throughout this difficult story. I know that sometimes it was painful and scary for you, but you found the strength to listen to Carol's story to the end. I hope it did not leave you indifferent and prompted you to take a fresh look at some things. And most importantly, take care of yourselves, my dear friends. Value each new day spent in the circle of family and loved ones. Do not risk your lives for the sake of illusory promises of quick enrichment. Remember that there are things incomparably more important than money: your health, your dreams, your feelings. The events of December 29th, 2017, which took place in an apartment on Macmillan Drive in Oshawa, Ontario, Canada. The caller, a plumber named Sean Ferridan, made a chilling discovery: pieces of human flesh clogging the sewer pipes. Further investigation led law enforcement to the doorstep of 45-year-old Adam Strong, who lived in the apartment below. To everyone's great surprise, Strong immediately confessed that he was storing human remains in his freezer. But this was just the tip of the iceberg in this complex and horrifying story. The roots of this tragedy run much deeper and require careful examination to determine to whom these remains belonged and how they ended up in the bathroom sewer. The year 2017 brought a horrific crime to the city of Oshawa that shook the entire country. On September 11th, a disturbing discovery was made in Lake Ontario near the shore of Oshawa. A 5-year-old boy fishing with his grandfather spotted human torsos in the water. Law enforcement immediately arrived at the scene, retrieved the remains from the water, and launched an investigation. Despite extensive searches involving divers, no other body parts were found. The autopsies showed that the torsos belonged to a woman, but the exact cause of death could not be determined. However, the nature of the injuries indicated a violent death. The absence of the head made it extremely difficult to identify the victim, so DNA analysis was the only way. And only on November 9, 2017, 2 months after the terrible discovery, the bitter truth was revealed. The torsos belonged to 18-year-old Rory Hatch, a pregnant Oshawa resident who had gone missing at the end of August of the same year. Rory Hatch was born on July 9, 1999, and was the favorite of her mother, Shannon Dion. Little is known about her father, but some of the girl's relatives had a reputation for living a reckless lifestyle. Her grandfather, Berard, a former biker, gangster, and boxer, was widely known as the founder and leader of the motorcycle club Satan's Choice. Rory's uncle, Harley, also belonged to the motorcycle club Hell's Angels. But despite these family ties, Rory's childhood was fairly quiet. She was described as a kind and smart girl. In addition to her mother, Rory had a very close relationship with her godmother and Shannon's best friend, Christy Melnick. In the lower grades, Rory excelled in her studies, and at the age of 13, she even received the prestigious title of Cadet of the Year in the local unit. But everything changed for the worse in the first year of high school, when someone introduced her to drugs, which led to addiction. The next years of Rory's life were filled with turbulence, and drugs became an integral part of her existence. In an attempt to finance her addiction, she resorted to prostitution, causing even more suffering for her mother. Shannon, in desperation, turned to Child Protective Services for help, hoping to save her daughter. Fortunately, in early 2017, Shannon's efforts paid off. Rory finally began to take steps to change her life. She found a job, returned to school, and seemed to find stability by moving in with her boyfriend, Tony. Despite all the hardships, Rory was determined to start a new chapter in her life. In August 2017, Rory told her mother about her pregnancy. She firmly decided to have the baby, and Shannon supported her decision. But the mother had no idea that her daughter had started using drugs again. On August 28th, near the shopping center, Rory met with Constable Christopher Kane. He had been watching the girl for a long time and was trying in every way to involve social services to help her overcome her addiction. During the conversation, Rory admitted that she was using drugs again and was engaged in prostitution to get money for a fix. Concerned about Rory's fate, Constable Kane decided to contact the appropriate services, but when he returned, the girl had already disappeared. On August 29, 2017, the day after meeting with the constable, a friend of her mother brought Rory to the hospital after an exacerbation of a mental disorder. Unfortunately, for unknown reasons, they were unable to stay with her and left after a few minutes, leaving Rory alone. Remarkably, just 15 minutes later, she decided to leave the hospital without waiting for the necessary medical care. Surveillance cameras captured Rory calmly leaving the building. This was the last confirmation that the girl was still alive. From that moment on, nothing was known about her whereabouts. When Rory's relatives and friends did not receive any news from her for several days, they became alarmed. Fearing the worst, they filed a missing person report with the police, which launched a massive search. Flyers with the photo of the missing person were posted all over the area, but all efforts to find Rory Hatch proved futile, and only the results of the DNA test brought the horrible news, confirming that she had become a victim of a violent crime. However, the investigation did not end there. Law enforcement faced a difficult task to find the rest of her body parts and piece together all the fragments of this tragic puzzle. And it seemed that success was near, but it came so unexpectedly that it exceeded all expectations. 2 months after the gruesome torso discovery, residents of the upstairs apartment at 19 McMillan Drive experienced persistent sewage problems. The situation escalated to the point where the couple had to call a plumber on December 29th. Since no blockages were found in the upper apartment, the workers asked permission to enter the apartment of 45-year-old Adam Strong, located on the floor below. When the plumber started working in his toilet, the air filled with an unbearable stench, different from the usual smells. The situation further escalated when Adam's behavior became nervous. He constantly walked around the room, closely monitoring every move and asking many questions. Despite being annoyed by his behavior, the plumbers tried to ignore it. Strong justified himself by saying that he was just curious because he himself had tried to cope with the problem, but to no avail. Perhaps they would have completely ignored Adam if it were not for the shocking discovery inside the pipe. The workers pulled out a 45-centimeter piece of human flesh with attached hair. To their horror, stunned by the gruesome discovery, they immediately notified the police. Within minutes, law enforcement arrived at the scene and confirmed that what was found was indeed human remains. After gathering all the necessary information from the plumbers and the alarmed couple, the officers began a conversation with Adam Strong, preparing for unexpected revelations. But nothing could have prepared them for what the suspect told them. Lowering his head, he confessed that it was human flesh, and if they needed the rest of the body parts, they were in his freezer. Strong was instantly arrested, and the police began searching the apartment. What they saw resembled a house of horrors, dirt everywhere, and the air was permeated with an unbearable stench of decay. In the bathroom, it turned out that Adam had dismantled the toilet, trying to eliminate the blockage. But the real horror awaited law enforcement. In the bedroom in the freezer lay the remains of a young woman with her head hidden in a bag. The body was in a state of decomposition, as Strong had said. Among the remains, a tattoo with the inscription "Je vis I live" was found exactly the same as Rory Hatch had. Further DNA examination confirmed that the remains from Adam Strong's apartment belonged to the missing Rory. There was more than enough evidence of her presence there. The girl's blood was found on the walls and ceiling of Adam's bedroom, and his biological fluids were found on her underwear. Rory's sneakers lay wrapped in plastic, spattered with blood. Police also discovered an improvised dissection table set up by Strong. The realization that it was on this table that Adam dismembered his victim made law enforcement officers shudder. During the search of the apartment, numerous sex toys, restraints, and a homemade bomb were also found. Fortunately, the explosives were neutralized in time, and although no one could figure out its origin, due to the lack of direct evidence of Strong's involvement in Rory's murder, the police could not charge him. Instead, he was charged with abusing the body. It was time for the investigation to get to know the life of this 45-year-old man more closely. Adam Strong, about whom little was known, settled in a rented apartment on McMillan in early 2007. For many years, he worked as a security guard on a film set in Oshawa and as a gas station attendant at 2 different stations in Ajax. Those who knew Strong described him as an eccentric man with a sinister character who considered himself smarter than he actually was. He could talk incessantly, not knowing when to stop. One of Adam's ex-girlfriends, whose name has not been disclosed, described him as cruel and prone to excessive control. Adam's landlady, Eugenia Papadakis, also had unpleasant impressions from communicating with Strong. In March 2017, after a fire in the house, she and her granddaughter visited Adam's apartment on McMillan Drive. The dwelling turned out to be cluttered with garbage, food scraps, and all sorts of junk. Needless to say, what they saw stunned the women. In addition, Strong showed an unhealthy interest in pornography, which indicated his passion for explicit content. These observations allowed a deeper look into his psyche and shed light on the dark, disturbing world that reigned in the suspect's apartment. However, despite the tragic circumstances, the evidence gathered was still insufficient to charge him with murder. So the detectives focused on obtaining a confession from Adam Strong. The morning of December 30th, 2017 was marked by the interrogation of Adam Strong, conducted by detectives from the Homicide Investigation Unit, Darren Short and Herman Daroga. By that time, the suspect had already managed to contact his lawyer. The investigators realized that this was their only chance to get valuable testimony from him, because the next day, there was to be a hearing on the possibility of releasing Strong on bail. After that, it would be impossible to interrogate him without a court order. Time was running out, so the detectives had to get important information from Adam by any means necessary. Starting the interrogation, the investigators had no clear idea what to expect. Deep down, they hoped that Strong would be nervous, because he had finally been caught.
So Adam, my name is Detective Short.
Hello, Detective
My first name is Darren. This is Detective Durego. And what's your name?
Adam.
Last name?
Strong.
Strong, okay. As of right now, what I want to tell you is the charge you're going to be facing right now is indignity to a body.
Instead, they were faced with an imperturbable, collected man who showed outright indifference to his situation. But the biggest problem was getting him to talk about the events related to Rory Hatch. Adam's stubbornness was surprising, especially considering his previous confession about human remains in the freezer. Realizing that time was running out, the detectives decided to change tactics. They tried to touch Strong's emotions, hoping to awaken at least a drop of remorse or sympathy for the victim and her loved ones. However, all attempts by investigators to get the desired answers were shattered against a wall of evasions and changes of subject.
How did you know Rory?
I'm not saying anything, I'm sorry.
Did you kill Rory?
Sorry, I'm not saying anything.
Adam's responses were shocking, but the only thing that seemed to affect him were photos of Rory, which he refused to look at. It was obvious that the suspect could no longer bear her gaze, and although the evidence gathered was quite enough to prove Rory Hatch's presence in Adam's apartment, the ultimate goal of the detectives was to
Uncover the truth about what happened and what led to the girl's tragic death. Unfortunately, Strong proved to be a tough nut to crack. No answers to questions about Rory. 2 hours later, it became obvious that the interrogation had reached a dead end. Adam's refusal to provide anything substantial raised more questions than answers. Having failed to succeed, the investigators reluctantly decided to stop the interrogation. What exactly brought Rory Hatch and Adam Strong together remained a mystery. Fortunately for the detectives, the suspect was not released on bail, so he remained in custody. Meanwhile, Oshawa police continued to search Adam's house, hoping to stumble upon new evidence and clues. The coroner's report on Rory's autopsy shed some light on the circumstances. It turned out that the girl's body had numerous injuries, including skull fractures. However, the forensic expert could not say with certainty whether these injuries were inflicted before or after her death. In addition, traces of drugs were found in the victim's body, and signs of the use of a restraining device were found on the body. Among the findings in Strong's house, the detective's attention was drawn to a bent hammer on which Rory's DNA was found. Investigators suggested that it was the murder weapon. However, even this was not the most shocking discovery, even when it seemed that nothing more would be found. In July 2018, 7 months after Adam's arrest, a hunting knife covered in human tissue was found in a kitchen drawer. Examination showed that the DNA found on the blade did not belong to Rory. Instead, it matched the genetic profile of another girl, Candace Fitzpatrick. Candace was born on February 3, 1989, and little is known about her childhood. The girl's parents, William Fitzpatrick, and a woman whose name has not been disclosed, divorced. After that, William moved to Alberta, and Candace stayed with her mother in Oshawa. Her life was chaotic and disorderly. At some point, she ran away from home, forcing her father to go looking for her in Oshawa. After reuniting, Candace declared her desire to live independently. And by the age of 19 in 2008, her life had turned into complete disorder. Like Rory, Candace was a troubled girl who struggled with drug addiction and engaged in prostitution to get money for her next fix. She could disappear from home for days or weeks at a time, but always returned. Until March 2008, from then on, her relatives never saw her alive again. William, growing increasingly worried about his daughter, launched a massive search throughout Oshawa. Oddly enough, an official missing person report for Candace was only filed with the police in 2010, 2 years after her disappearance. William reported that back in 2008, he had repeatedly contacted law enforcement, but they did not take the case seriously due to the peculiarities of Candace's lifestyle. 10 long years of painful uncertainty passed before the Fitzpatrick family finally learned the terrible truth they had long feared. The shocking coincidences between the fates of Candace and Rory were not limited to difficult life circumstances alone. Even outwardly, the girls were strikingly similar. The cruel irony of fate is that despite the 10-year difference in their disappearances, both died at the hands of the same person. It is unbearable to realize that if Adam had been exposed after Candace's murder, Rory could have been alive. The remains of Candace Fitzpatrick still have not been found, and the solution to this chilling mystery is known only to one person. Investigators managed to convince the prosecutor to drop the initial charge against Adam Strong and reclassify it as a charge of first-degree murder of Rory Hatch and Candace Fitzpatrick. This gave detectives the opportunity to interrogate the suspect again. Realizing the importance and complexity of the case, the Oshawa police leadership involved Detective Paul Mitten in the investigation, a highly qualified and experienced investigator, known for his ability to unravel the most complicated crimes. On November 18, 2018, 11 months after the first interrogation, Adam Strong again found himself face-to-face with the investigation. This interrogation was to be decisive. To the surprise of Detective Paul Mitten, the suspect suddenly began voluntarily sharing information.
Adam!
How you doing?
Good, you?
Had better days. I understand I'm in a lot of trouble. Is there any way I can get a cigarette?
What are you gonna hankering for?
Wendy's triple?
Yeah, that's doable.
No pickles? Iced tea, no ice? Two, their value, spicy chicken wraps, and a grilled chicken Caesar salad.
Okay.
Is that outrageous?
No, that's doable.
I don't know how appropriate this is, but I'd like you to pass on to her mother and her father my condolences. I would like to, and I've fielded this to my lawyer, and he's not interested in it, and I don't understand why, of spilling the beans and being as comfortable as I can in jail. Not like $100,000 like Picton, but like an allowance. I don't know. I don't know. Like internet access, like a TV. Like I don't have anybody who's gonna buy me a TV. She's definitely deceased.
Yes.
Yes.
And you clearly have said you're not disposed of her.
Yes.
Yes.
Tried to. But unfortunately was foiled by inadequate plumbing.
Yep.
And that's a freaking shame. Not for me. For me.
Yeah, for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. You sound really selfish when you say that.
Sorry. I don't expect to get out of the jail free card. I don't. I just want to be comfortable in jail, man.
Okay.
I didn't feel it. I'm really sorry.
Obviously, hours leading into a couple of days, I would imagine.
No, it was all done in one evening.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Like this was all one piece, and then this was all one piece.
I couldn't. Yeah.
Really?
Sorry, man. I don't remember.
Really?
Yeah. It wasn't important to me, man.
I hope one day the light bulb goes off for you. Not that you're find remorse, but just for you to realize you could help some people feel better.
Yeah.
Adam was convinced that their conversation would be limited exclusively to the topic of dismemberment of bodies. He did not even suspect that his own careless confessions and slips of the tongue would allow investigators to draw key conclusions about the entire chronology of events related to the horrific crimes. The interrogation lasted 10 grueling hours and ended only when Detective Mitten felt he had obtained all the necessary testimony.
Is it safe to assume as an investigator that Candace's
I can't go into
proposal
that.
was similar?
I can't go into that.
How did you meet Candace?
You know what? So long ago, I have no idea.
Do you remember if you met her like more than once, or was it just one time you met her?
Sorry, because every time she came to my house, she left my house. Under her own power.
Candace, given the fact that we're gonna assume because of tissue found on that knife, the gutting knife, that came back as Candace's. Why not use that on Rory?
Didn't even think of it.
Because her DNA wasn't found.
Didn't even think of it. I'm a real bad procrastinator, and that is really a detriment to myself.
On September 28, 2020, When 12 years had passed since Candace's disappearance and 3 years since Rory's disappearance, Adam Strong appeared in court on charges of these murders. Despite numerous evidence gathered against him, he refused to plead guilty to both counts. During the trial, the prosecution presented a powerful evidence base, including stunning records of interrogations that supported their case against Adam Strong. Testimony from Petra Danchin about the violence she suffered at the hands of the defendant further strengthened the weight of the accusations. Although Adam never revealed the details of Rory's death during interrogations, prosecutors built their case based on the available facts. According to their version, Strong lured the girl to his house by promising money for intimate services. As soon as she entered, he tied her up and brutally beat her with a hammer found in his home. Horribly, at that moment there was no one on the upper floor, so no one heard the desperate cries for help. After the murder, Adam dismembered Rory's lifeless body and threw the torso into Oshawa Harbor. Geolocation data from her mobile phone confirmed that on September 4th, a week before the discovery of human remains, Strong was in that area, which only strengthened the evidence against him. Prosecutors also expressed confidence that Candace suffered the same fate at the hands of the killer, although her remains had not been found at that time. Lawyers, however, insisted on Adam's non-involvement in Rory's death, claiming that death occurred as a result of a drug overdose, and their client was only trying to get rid of the body. As for Candace, the defense claimed that there was a lack of evidence that she had died in Strong's house at all. They also emphasized the limited size of the freezer, which could hardly hold the remains of 2 victims. However, having carefully examined all the evidence presented, Judge Joseph DeLuca came to the unshakable conviction of Adam Strong's guilt. He rejected the defense's arguments and found the prosecution's evidence convincing and incriminating. Strong tried to justify his actions with the traumatic experience of his childhood. According to him, at an early age, he was subjected to a brutal attack that left an indelible imprint on his psyche. Adam even expressed sympathy for the families of the deceased, but the sincerity of these words was highly doubtful. His behavior demonstrated an alarming level of indifference, lack of remorse, and signs of a split personality. The materials presented during the trial vividly demonstrated that Adam Strong was well aware of the severity of his actions and their consequences. He acted consciously and prudently, without feeling any remorse. In fact, the defendant viewed prison as a way to escape from life's troubles. In the face of unemployment and financial hardship, he was ready to exchange his freedom for the basic benefits that imprisonment could guarantee. The court found that Rory Hatch's death occurred as a result of an attack, so Adam Strong was found guilty of first-degree murder. As for Candace Fitzpatrick, his guilt was classified as manslaughter. In May 2021, Strong was sentenced to life imprisonment. In addition, for the murder of Candace, he received an additional 80-year term, which is to be served concurrently with life imprisonment. This is the maximum punishment provided for by the country's legislation. Although nothing could bring back the dead girls, Rory and Candace relatives felt that justice had finally prevailed. In July 2021, Strong provided valuable information about the location of Candace Fitzpatrick's remains. Thanks to his testimony, on November 4th of the same year, the police found the place where, according to the criminal, he had buried the girl's body. On November 8th, law enforcement officers finally managed to find human remains. After conducting the necessary examinations, on November 13th, they were officially identified as the remains of Candace. The final identification results were announced at a press conference on February 16, 2022. What exactly made Adam Strong change his behavior and start talking remains a mystery. Some suggest that he sought notoriety through his actions. However, despite the tragic circumstances that united their fates, the families of Rory Hatch and Candace Fitzpatrick continue to support each other and together overcome the painful consequences of the horror they experienced. The cases of the murders of these girls have been solved. The victim's family was unspeakably happy after the announcement of the verdict for their daughter's killer, because they understood that he would never leave prison alive. But the investigation suspects that Adam Strong may be involved in other murders as well. In June 2022, during a search of his apartment, the police seized some physical evidence. However, the details of this finding are being kept secret while additional investigations are ongoing. Let's consider the main reasons that led to this tragedy. 1. Drug addiction. Both victims, Rory and Candace, struggled with drug addiction. This made them vulnerable and forced them to engage in risky behavior such as prostitution to finance their addiction. 2. Social isolation. Although both girls had families who cared about them, their lifestyle often led to isolation from loved ones and support. 3. Insufficient attention from law enforcement. In the case of Candace Fitzpatrick, her father's initial reports of her disappearance were not taken seriously due to her lifestyle. Now, I would like to share some important tips on how to avoid similar situations in the future. 1. Fight drug addiction. If you or someone you love is suffering from drug addiction, seek professional help immediately. There are many rehabilitation and support programs that can help overcome addiction. 2. Stay in touch with loved ones. Communicate regularly with family and friends. If you notice that someone close to you is distancing themselves or behaving unusually, don't ignore it. Offer your support and assistance. 3. Be vigilant. If you notice something suspicious in your surroundings, unusual smells, strange behavior of neighbors, don't be shy to report it to the appropriate authorities. Your vigilance can save someone's life. 4. Take disappearances seriously. If someone you know has gone missing, report it to the police immediately. Don't wait, hoping that the person will return on their own. Every hour can be crucial. 5. Teach children about safety. Talk to children about personal safety. Teach them to recognize potentially dangerous situations and people. Explain how important it is to trust their intuition and not be ashamed to ask for help. 6. Don't judge but help. Instead of judging people for their lifestyle, try to understand their problems and offer help. Often people find themselves in difficult situations due to circumstances they cannot control. This tragic story of Rory Hatch and Candace Fitzpatrick demonstrates to us how important it is to be vigilant and caring members of society. We all have a responsibility for the safety of our community. It is important to remember that criminals like Adam Strong often look for vulnerable victims. They may seem like ordinary people, but behind this mask lie dangerous intentions. Therefore, it is critically important to learn to recognize alarming signs and not ignore them. This case also highlights the need to reform the system for responding to missing persons. Regardless of the lifestyle of the missing person, every case must be investigated with the same seriousness and thoroughness. Perhaps if the police had responded more quickly to Candace's disappearance, the tragedy with Rory could have been prevented. Remember that safety is a shared responsibility. Each of us can contribute to creating a safer society. Be attentive to your surroundings, support those who need it, and don't be afraid to ask for help when you feel that something is wrong. It all began on February 10, 2004, when an event shook the small suburb of Altamont Springs in the state of Florida. A young girl and her boyfriend committed a horrific crime that shocked the local community with its brutality and cynicism. It involved the girl's father, a baseball bat, and a garbage container. Even after years of investigation, many details of this chilling act remain a mystery. Courtney Schulhoff, a young resident of Altamont Springs, found herself at the center of this gruesome story. A combination of youthful maximalism, immaturity, and a desire for revenge pushed her to commit a terrible crime, the murder of her own father. This case vividly demonstrates the tragic consequences that uncontrolled emotions and a lack of common sense can lead to. Altamont Springs, a cozy town with a population of about 40,000, is located in the heart of Florida, in Seminole County. Usually, it's a peaceful and safe place, ideal for family life and recreation. Its proximity to many tourist attractions makes Altamont Springs an attractive place to live. However, behind the external gloss and hospitality lies a dark side, as evidenced by the shocking case of Courtney Schulhoff. The quiet community of Altamont Springs became the arena for a chilling family drama that led to cold-blooded murder. This story reminds us that evil can hide behind a mask of ordinariness, and that even seemingly prosperous families can harbor terrible secrets. Courtney Christine Schulhoff was born in sunny Florida on December 27, 1987. Her parents were Steven and Tracy Schulhoff, but unfortunately, their marriage did not stand the test of time. The divorce of her parents was a heavy blow for young Courtney, leaving a deep mark on her soul. After her mother left the family nest, the girl remained under the care of her father in the house where she spent her childhood. However, the lives of Steven and Courtney underwent further changes when financial difficulties forced them to move to a new home. Initially, this news did not enthuse Courtney, but over time, she came to terms with the new circumstances. It seemed that life was gradually getting back on track, and the first few months in the new place were relatively calm. In 2003, Courtney was a student at Lyman High School. Once a diligent and successful student, after her parents' divorce, she began to rapidly lose interest in education. Skipping classes and indifference to grades turned the once promising student into an outsider. But changes were happening not only within the walls of the school. Outside the educational institution, Courtney fell under the influence of a dubious company. New friends with mixed reputations became her guides into a world far from the one she was used to. These acquaintances had a detrimental effect on the girl's personality, gradually changing her values and priorities. I have seen many similar stories. Parental divorce often becomes a trigger for problematic behavior in teenagers. A lack of attention, emotional instability, and a desire to be accepted in a new environment can push young people down the wrong path. However, even in the darkest times, there is always hope for change if the warning signs are recognized in time and a helping hand is extended. I could hardly believe my ears when I heard what happened next. Courtney's transformation was not limited to just her outward appearance. Her behavior became brazen and rebellious, challenging everyone around her. Naturally, the main blow was taken by her father, who embodied the main authority in the girl's life. Fierce conflicts erupted between them, fueling the fire of hostility and misunderstanding. The tension reached its peak when Courtney decided to temporarily move in with her mother, Tracy, seeking refuge from her father's control. However, this step proved to be short-lived. Tracy quickly realized that she was not ready to accept the new version of her daughter with all her problems and challenges. So, having no other choice, Steven was forced to open the doors of his home to his prodigal daughter once again. Courtney's return home brought no relief. On the contrary, old problems flared up with renewed vigor, especially the issue of school attendance. The girl skipped classes more and more often, seeking solace in the company of her dubious friends. One of their favorite meeting places was the running track located near Lyman High School. It was here that fate brought Courtney together with Michael, a 20-year-old college student. A spark ignited between them, quickly growing into a passionate romance. It seemed that in Michael's arms, the girl found what she had been missing: so much understanding, support, and a sense of her own significance. However, would this meeting become a lifeline for Courtney, or, on the contrary, further entangle her in the web of problems? I have seen more than once how young people, finding themselves at a crossroads, seek salvation in romantic relationships. However, this is often just an illusion that hides the true roots of the problem. Without proper attention and help from loved ones, such connections can become a catalyst for even greater upheavals and dramas. Michael Morin, Courtney's new chosen one, seemed to be the complete opposite of the girl. A former high school football player, he demonstrated remarkable success in his studies, regularly receiving the highest grades. After entering a nearby college, Michael continued to follow the right path, meeting the expectations of his parents. However, meeting Courtney became a turning point in his life. Several weeks of intense communication turned their relationship into something more than just a teenage infatuation. Michael and Courtney became inseparable, spending every free moment together. Their obsession with each other overshadowed everything else, and soon Courtney practically stopped attending school, finally putting an end to her education. The news that his daughter had unofficially dropped out of school came as a real shock to Steven Schulhoff. As a father who constantly fought with Courtney over her poor academic performance, he immediately saw the root of the problem in Michael. From the very beginning, a strong tension arose between them, which only exacerbated Courtney's already difficult relationship with her father. The girl perceived her father's dissatisfaction as an unwillingness to see her happy. Time and again, she tried to convince Steven that Michael was a good person worthy of his trust. But the man remained adamant, as rumors had reached him about the young man's dark past associated with car theft. Steven sincerely sought to warn his daughter against rash steps, but his words only met with a deaf wall of misunderstanding and stubbornness. I have witnessed similar situations more than once. Youthful infatuation often clouds the mind, causing young people to ignore the voice of reason and the advice of their elders. However, it is at such moments that it is extremely important to find the right approach so as not to push the child away, but to help them see reality. Unfortunately, in the case of Courtney and Steven, it seems it was already too late for compromises. I was stunned when I learned about the unexpected twist in this story. The conflict between Courtney and her father Steven reached a boiling point. The girl began to openly accuse him of abuse, and unfortunately, there were some grounds for this. One time, the situation spiraled out of control when Courtney invited friends over, including Michael. Steven, returning home earlier than expected, caught them smoking and drinking alcohol. The enraged father burst into the room where the improvised party was taking place. Not holding back his emotions, he began to reproach his daughter for arranging a get-together without his permission. Screams and accusations filled the space, and eventually, in front of Courtney's friends, Steven slapped her across the face. This moment became a turning point, as now the girl had real evidence of physical abuse by her father. Despite the seriousness of the situation, neither Courtney nor Steven took any steps to resolve it. Instead, their relationship continued to plummet into an abyss of mutual resentment and disrespect. Although the girl had dropped out of school, she refused to look for a job. Instead, she used her father's credit card without permission, buying expensive clothes and things online. Courtney would bring home boxes of new purchases, disregarding Steven's worsening financial situation. I have seen many similar situations where family conflicts reach a critical point. A lack of mutual understanding, an unwillingness to compromise, and the selfish actions of each party only intensify the tension. In the case of Courtney and Steven, it seemed that they found themselves in an enchanted circle of mutual claims and grievances from which there was no way out. However, even in the most difficult situations, there is always a chance for reconciliation if both parties are willing to take a step towards each other. Perhaps if Steven and Courtney had found the strength to sit down at the negotiating table, listen to each other, and try to find common ground, they could have avoided the tragic consequences. But unfortunately, they chose a different path, the path of confrontation and escalation of the conflict. The next fragment of this story made me hold my breath. Despite the escalation of the conflict, Courtney continued to act against her father's will. For several months, she secretly invited Michael to their home for overnight stays while Steven was asleep. Even after her father categorically forbade her from seeing the young man, the girl found ways to circumvent this restriction. Instead of sneaking out to meet him, she openly brought Michael home whenever she pleased. Every conversation between Courtney and Steven turned into a battlefield. The father did not spare harsh words towards his daughter and her chosen one, which only deepened the gulf between them. Over time, the situation became increasingly unmanageable, and it seemed that reconciliation was no longer possible. But one day, Steven took an unexpected step. Upon opening his checkbook, he noticed that several pages were missing. Without hesitation, the man called the police and filed a report against his own daughter, hoping it would be a harsh lesson for her. After talking to the investigator, Courtney returned home, feeling a new level of fear towards her father. From now on, she perceived him not just as a strict and cruel authority figure, but as a real threat to her well-being. Personally, I have witnessed similar family dramas more than once. Conflicts between parents and children, especially during the teenage years, can be extremely exhausting and destructive. However, involving law enforcement in resolving family problems is always a last resort. Often, it only worsens the situation, undermining trust and creating an atmosphere of fear and mistrust. In the case of Courtney and Steven, it seems all chances for a peaceful resolution of the conflict were lost. Instead of trying to find common ground, they chose the path of escalating the confrontation. By filing a report against his daughter, the father crossed a line after which a return to normal relations became practically impossible. The fear and resentment that gripped Courtney only fueled her desire to break free from Steven's control at any cost. What happened next seemed unbelievable, but it was the truth. Courtney, consumed by fear and despair, was ready to do anything to get rid of the threat her father posed. But life made its own adjustments, further complicating the already tense situation. At the end of 2003, Steven began dating a woman named Elaine. The details of their acquaintance remained a secret, but the very fact of her father's new relationship added fuel to the conflict. During the same period, Courtney, trying to somehow put her life in order, signed up for courses to obtain a high school diploma. At the same time, she continued to meet with Michael, despite Steven's constant attempts to hinder their relationship. Eventually, the lovers, tired of the endless pressure, decided to run away together. The only obstacle on the path to their cherished freedom was the lack of transportation and money. Courtney and Michael's plan was simple. Take the young man's father's car and head to Maryland, where they hoped to find shelter and financial support from the girl's grandparents. But as often happens, even the most well-thought-out plans can fail. Having stolen the car, the lovers set off on their journey, full of hope for a better future. However, halfway to Maryland, they suddenly changed their minds and turned the car back towards home. What exactly prompted them to take this step remains a mystery, but the consequences of this act, especially for Michael, proved to be extremely unfavorable. I have seen it when young people, consumed by despair and a desire to break free from parental control, resorted to rash actions. Running away from home, stealing a car, all this seems like a solution to problems in the short term. But reality quickly puts everything in its place, and the consequences of such actions can be devastating for all parties involved. In the case of Courtney and Michael, their attempt to escape only worsened the already tense situation. Instead of finding freedom and understanding, they found themselves facing new challenges and threats, and although the reasons for their sudden decision to return home remain unknown, it can be assumed that fear of uncertainty and awareness of the real consequences of their actions played a significant role in this choice. What I learned next turned this case into a real labyrinth of secrets and mysteries. Michael's parents, just like Steven, decided to turn to the law to punish their son for stealing the car. The young man found himself behind bars, where he spent a long 70 days pondering his actions and future. After his release, Michael was given a probationary period, but this was only the beginning of his problems. The young man's parents, convinced that Courtney had a detrimental effect on their son, began to insist on ending the relationship. From the outside, it was obvious that Michael and Courtney's relationship was far from healthy and constructive. However, neither the lovers nor their parents realized how much worse things could get. This was especially true for Steven, Courtney's father, who did not even suspect that his life would be tragically cut short a few months later. After Michael's return from imprisonment, the situation escalated to a critical point. The young man's parents, especially his father, continued to pressure their son, demanding that he break off his relationship with Courtney. But Michael was adamant in his decision to stay with his beloved. This led to his angry parents kicking the young man out of the house, leaving him homeless. Finding himself on the street, Michael found shelter in the most unexpected place, the apartment of his girlfriend's father. Under the cover of night, he would sneak into Steven's dwelling to spend the night there. It wasn't the first time the young man had secretly stayed in the apartment, but now it had become a daily routine. From a detective's point of view, this situation was explosive. The tension between Michael, Courtney, and Steven had reached its peak, and any little thing could become the spark that would ignite this powder keg. Michael's nightly visits, his presence in the house despite Steven's categorical prohibition, created an atmosphere of constant fear and mistrust. All the participants in this drama seemed to be blinded by their emotions and desires, not noticing the obvious risks and dangers. The lovers sought to be together at any cost, not realizing that their actions only worsened the situation. The parents, in turn, tried to control the lives of their children, not realizing that excessive pressure only pushed them into each other's arms. What happened next exceeded all my wildest assumptions. The situation with Michael and Courtney was rapidly spiraling out of control. The young man, having left his college education, actually settled in Steven's house without his knowledge or consent. Moreover, Michael even changed his official address to Courtney's father's residence and listed his home phone number as a contact person in his parole plans. All of this was happening behind Steven's back, who had no idea of the extent of Michael's intrusion into his life. Despite the fact that the young man had effectively become homeless, he made no effort to find a job and provide for himself. Instead, all the expenses fell on Courtney's shoulders, who shamelessly used her father's credit card. When the card's limit was exhausted, Steven planned to have a serious conversation with his daughter about her irresponsible behavior. But fate had other plans, and what happened next forever changed the lives of all the participants in this drama. On February 10, 2014, Elaine, Steven's new companion, tried to call him several times but to no avail. Worried by the long silence, the woman decided to personally visit her beloved's home. Sometime between 2 and 4 in the afternoon, Elaine got behind the wheel of her car and headed to Steven's residence. What she saw as she approached the house instantly aroused her suspicion. On the sidewalk, she noticed Michael, Courtney's boyfriend, walking Steven's dog. He was wearing one of the homeowner's t-shirts, which in itself was strange. But what alarmed Elaine the most was Michael's reaction when their eyes met. The young man, seeing her in the car, instantly rushed to call someone, as if he had been caught at the scene of a crime. This behavior only intensified the feeling that something was very wrong. As an experienced detective, I know that intuition rarely fails in such situations. Although Elaine had no direct evidence, she felt that Michael's strange behavior concealed something sinister. His presence in Steven's house, his free use of the owner's belongings, and his instant panicked reaction to Elaine's appearance were all alarming signals that could not. Elaine, wasting no time, got out of the car and headed for the front door of Steven's house. At the threshold, she met Courtney, but the door was locked. When asked about her father's whereabouts, the girl shrugged, replying that she had no idea. Then she walked away, leaving Elaine standing in front of the closed door without a key. The woman noticed that Steven's truck was still parked in its usual spot and decided to call the police. Local law enforcement officers arrived at Elaine's call and, having obtained a search warrant, entered the house through the back door. What they found inside stunned even the seasoned cops. In Steven's bedroom, the walls were splattered with blood, and a bloodied baseball bat lay near the bed. But the most horrifying sight awaited them in a plastic garbage can the owner's mutilated body with a torn-off ear and a shattered face. Whoever committed this crime wasn't too concerned about hiding the traces. In addition, the police found bank statements on the dining table, some of which were marked with a pen. Courtney was nowhere to be seen. Elaine, who knew about the tense relationship between Steven, his daughter, and her boyfriend, immediately suspected foul play. Law enforcement quickly organized a search for the suspects, but as it turned out, neither Courtney nor Michael tried too hard to escape or hide. The young man was found in the restroom of a nearby shopping mall, wearing Steven's t-shirt, just as Elaine had said. He had the victim's wallet, car keys, and credit cards on him. Michael was detained for questioning. As for Courtney, it was even simpler. The girl turned herself in to the police at her mother's house. During interrogations, Courtney and Michael gave completely different testimonies. The young man initially claimed that he was living in the basement of Steven's house, knew nothing about his death, and received the items from Courtney. He explained his escape to the mall by fear that the homeowner would find out about his presence. But when the police informed Michael about the murder, he suddenly changed his testimony. With tears in his eyes, the young man stated that everything happened as if in a fog, and he came to his senses already with a bloody bat in his hands. Michael confessed to the crime, but insisted that he acted at Courtney's instigation, who asked him to kill her father because of a conflict over money spent from a credit card. His story sounded confusing and unconvincing. Courtney, during the first interrogation, blamed everything on Michael, assuring that she only learned about her father's death from the young man. But later, in a separate confession, she told the detectives more details. According to her, the idea of murder belonged to Michael, and she only helped to take Steven's dog out of the room and prepared the bat. While the young man was dealing with her sleeping and defenseless father, Courtney heard every sound. But the most unexpected twist occurred in September 2006, when at the final stage of the trial, Courtney was found guilty. Asked if she wanted to say something, the girl, who had been denying her involvement all this time, suddenly stated, "I would like to openly admit that Michael Morin is not the murderer of my father. I take full responsibility and accept the sentence handed down to me." This shocking statement was heard in the courtroom where Courtney Schulhoff was sentenced to life imprisonment without the right to parole. She listened to the verdict without visible emotion. Less than a year later, in April 2007, the trial of Michael Morin took place. He faced the death penalty if found guilty. And again, Courtney repeated that only she committed the crime, and Michael knew nothing about it. However, her words contradicted the testimony of the young man himself, who even added new details allegedly. He and Courtney stopped by McDonald's and thought about throwing Steven's body off a bridge. In the end, Michael Morin was also found guilty of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. According to information from 2017, Courtney Schulhoff's sentence was reduced to approximately 40 years. This case remains one of the most enigmatic in my practice. Despite the fact that both criminals received their deserved punishment, it is still unclear what really happened on that fateful night. Undoubtedly, Steven was killed with a baseball bat, but who dealt the fatal blow remains an open question. On the one hand, Courtney confessed to killing her father. On the other hand, Michael also admitted his guilt, and it was in his basement that Steven's bloodied t-shirt, which the young man often wore, was found. Moreover, Michael was much larger and stronger than Courtney, so he had enough strength to deal with the victim using a bat. However, we should not forget that Steven was sleeping and could not resist, and Courtney was able to describe the course of the crime in detail and even characterize her father's dying sounds. So who actually committed this brutal murder? On March 7th, 2019, something horrific and mysterious happened in the Nevada desert. A local man driving through the desolate area noticed an abandoned car and immediately called the police. When law enforcement arrived at the scene, They saw that the car's windows and doors were smashed, as if someone had tried to escape from the inside. At first, it seemed that no one was inside, but they were alerted by the smell of decay coming from the trunk. Upon opening it, they discovered the body of a 71-year-old psychiatrist from California, Tom Berard. Tom was a well-known and respected person who had dedicated his entire life to helping others. His patients adored him for his kindness and compassion, and his colleagues respected him for his professionalism. Unfortunately, Tom had no children of his own, although he was married. Perhaps that's why he immersed himself in work with troubled children and teenagers, trying to fill the void in his heart. In addition to psychiatry, Tom had another passion: magic. He was a member of the exclusive magicians club, the Magic Castle, and often entertained his young patients with tricks. He especially enjoyed turning a $1 bill into a $100 bill. This trick invariably caused delight and joy in children. If Tom found out that one of his patients' parents was having financial difficulties, he would give them this magic bill without hesitation. Thanks to his generosity and kindness, Tom became a true light in the lives of many disadvantaged children and their families. How did he end up in the trunk in the middle of the desert, hundreds of miles from home? I'll tell you all the details right now. Berard's patients were many women who found themselves in difficult life circumstances. Single mothers suffering from drug addiction or forced to sell their bodies to feed their children. Tom sincerely cared about their fates and often offered financial assistance, even though it might have seemed unethical from the point of view of his profession. But one day in December 2000, when Tom was 52, his own life turned upside down. How, of course, upside down because he was Trump's psychologist. Sorry, a bad joke. His wife found out that he was secretly communicating with young girls on the internet, meeting with them and giving them money. She immediately filed for divorce, suspecting her husband of infidelity and sexual relations with his patients. Tom denied any illegal actions and insisted that he was guided solely by the desire to help women in need. However, his reputation was tarnished, and his motives were incomprehensible to those around him. It seemed that at this point, Dr. Berard's personal life had finally collapsed. But during a vacation in Las Vegas in 2022, he met Judy, a 42-year-old divorced mother of 4. Despite the age difference, they quickly found common ground. Both did not drink alcohol, spent time by the pool, went to concerts, and even promised each other to meet again. Soon, Judy moved in with Tom in the small town of Salinas. They lived together in a cozy country house, and it seemed that the doctor had finally found his happiness. Judy's children became a real family for him, which he had never had. In 2017, Dr. Berard's wife took another unexpected turn. Through the internet, he met 24-year-old Kelsey Turner, a young and ambitious girl with a difficult fate. Kelsey was born on May 5, 1993 in Norfolk, Virginia. At the age of 22, she decided to radically change her life and moved to sunny California with the dream of becoming a successful model. On social media, the girl created the image of a bad Barbie, a sexy and daring beauty who is not afraid to break the rules. It seemed that fate itself smiled upon Kelsey. She began posing for such famous men's magazines as Playboy and Maxim. Once, some of her photos from those days fell into my hands. I must admit, the girl was really stunning. A slender figure, lush white curls, a magnetic gaze. Men love such women. But as is often the case, a completely different reality was hidden behind the glossy cover. It turned out that despite her popularity on the internet, and Kelsey had over 100,000 subscribers, her modeling career never took off, and she already had 2 children from different men, a boy and a girl. The first pregnancy occurred when Kelsey was only 17, but the boy who was the child's father quickly disappeared from her life immediately after the birth of her daughter. In 2014, Turner made another attempt to establish her personal life. She got married and gave birth to a son. But this marriage also broke up very quickly, leaving Kelsey a single mother with 2 children in her arms and a lot of debts. And so, yesterday she was a star of the network, and today she is a destitute, homeless woman who barely makes ends meet. It was probably at this moment of despair that she met Dr. Berard. Having learned about Kelsey's difficult circumstances, Thomas offered to rent an apartment for her and the children for $3,000 a month. He not only paid the deposit, but also paid for housing for a whole year and gave money for daily expenses. And all this was from his own pocket, without demanding anything in return. Of course, such a gesture can be assessed in different ways. Some will see it as a manifestation of sincere mercy, others as another proof of the doctor's strange inclinations in relations with young women. But from the point of view of the investigation, the fact itself is important. a 71-year-old respected psychiatrist suddenly decided to sponsor the life of a failed model and her 2 children. Why? And wasn't it part of some kind of intricate manipulation on Kelsey's part? As it turned out later, Kelsey was far from the only young woman patronized by 71-year-old Dr. Berard. There were a good dozen of them, and they all gladly took advantage of the generosity of the elderly psychiatrist. But it seems that even among them, Kelsey stood out with her special appetites. No one else demanded such exorbitant sums from Tom. Judy, of course, knew about her husband's charitable impulses, and he himself did not hide it. However, Tom's relationship with Kelsey was becoming increasingly tense. Despite the crazy money he gave her supposedly for the maintenance of children, the girl's appetites grew incessantly. On social networks, she flaunted photos from noisy parties in the company of friends and did not even think about changing her lifestyle. Judy finally came to her senses. Kelsey was shamelessly exploiting Tom's kindness, manipulating his feelings. She begged her husband to stop sponsoring the girl, but he had already managed to throw $300,000 down the drain. Every week, Kelsey received money from him for renting a home, refueling a car, and her own whims. And all these expenses instantly turned into drinking and partying. Even a saint would lose patience here. But for some reason, Tom also needed pressure from Judy to finally come to his senses and stop paying for Kelsey's dissolute life. He warned the landlord that he would give the money only for the next 3 months, and then let the girl manage on her own. Of course, Kelsey did not like this. She suddenly lost her main breadwinner. Her fury fell not only on Tom, but also on that bitch Judy, who, oh horror, dared to open her husband's eyes. In messages, the girl promised to kill her rival and included her in the blacklist. Feeling that Tom was moving away, Kelsey resorted to outright blackmail. She threatened to call the police and say that he was a pedophile, thereby ruining his career and reputation. A person frightened by scandal is easy prey for manipulators. Tom was afraid of gossip and condemnation, but luckily Judy was there to support him in the difficult moment. I must admit that even I, a seasoned cop, got the creeps from this story. It's hard to believe that a young girl can be so insidious and merciless, and all for the sake of easy money. After Thomas stopped paying the rent for Kelsey's apartment, she was evicted in November 2018. It would seem that their relationship should have ended there, but not at all. The girl continued to terrorize the elderly doctor with threats, and in the end, he agreed to give her money for the last time just to get rid of her forever. Kelsey told Tom a sad story that social services had taken away her daughter, and now she wants to leave the city. In December 2018, she moved to Las Vegas, Nevada. At that time, Thomas decided to stop all communication with her. But Kelsey herself did not waste time. Barely arriving in Vegas, she met some Greg, and right after Christmas, they started living together. However, the relationship of this couple was, to put it mildly, turbulent. The police visited their home several times because of domestic violence, and Greg was even arrested. But Kelsey did not grieve alone for long. Already in February 2019, she found herself a new boyfriend, John Logan Kenninson, an extremely dubious personality. He had just been released from prison, where he was serving a sentence for drug distribution, and immediately occupied Kelsey's home. And then Dr. Berard, who was in Vegas at a medical conference at the time, behaved extremely strangely. Despite all of Kelsey's previous threats, he met with her. Excuse me, I can't help but add, but don't all Trump supporters always want to go back to the way things used to be? A coincidence? I don't think so. It seems that the elderly man simply could not erase the girl from his life. Upon returning to California, he began to help her again, this time with money. And all because Kelsey wrote to him that her new roommate was beating her and begged for help for herself and her son. Thomas, of course, became seriously alarmed. But he decided not to tell Judy the truth. He lied that he was going to some magic show. On March 1, 2019, he flew to Las Vegas to see with his own eyes what was happening to Kelsey. It turned out that the girl lives in the house not only with her son and a sadist roommate. They also had a tenant, a certain Diana Pena, a 30-year-old waitress. She lived for free in exchange for babysitting Kelsey's son. In addition to this strange company, a not-quite-sewn-on guy named Jeremy also lived in the house. He occupied a room on the first floor. And so Kelsey introduces Dr. Berard to all these people, supposedly her good acquaintance, almost a benefactor who is in love with her. Of course, such an explanation caused surprise and bewilderment among the roommates. But Kelsey herself vehemently denied any romantic connection. They say the man is just incredibly generous. That's why he helps. And it seemed that everything was fine. But on the very first night of Thomas's stay in the house, an unfortunate surprise happened. Jeremy's girlfriend appeared on the doorstep blonde, drunk, and obviously not averse to flirting with a wealthy guest. And he, why sin to conceal, was partial to young beauties. Kelsey terribly disliked this. Apparently, she was afraid that a random rival would take away her sponsor. And without an influx of fresh dollars, Kelsey's usual way of life with drinking and partying was under threat. That evening, Thomas and Jeremy's girlfriend decided to go to the store. Dr. Berard got behind the wheel as he did not drink alcohol. But Kelsey, consumed by jealousy, began to accuse her companion of deliberately creating discord in her relationship with Thomas. Jeremy seemed to feel the growing tension. Upon returning home, he hastily packed his things and left the house with his girlfriend, apparently so as not to aggravate the situation. Meanwhile, Thomas sent Judy a message. He explained that he came to Kelsey to clarify the situation and find out the truth. He promised to stay for the weekend and return home on March 4th. Judy was seriously worried about her husband. She knew better than anyone what Kelsey was capable of in her cruelty and manipulations. And Thomas, honest and trusting, would hardly be able to stand up for himself. She desperately begged him to return and never meet Kelsey again. After all, that girl, in Judy's opinion, was a dangerous person in an extremely unstable state. But all persuasion was in vain. Thomas did not listen to his wife. And as it turned out, that message was the last one Judy received from her beloved husband. After that, Thomas stopped communicating, and his phone was turned off altogether. Alarming premonitions did not leave Judy. She knew that her husband was suffering from early dementia, which made the situation even more dramatic. Sometimes Thomas could not find his car in the parking lot or lost things, and sometimes he even forgot the way home or did not recognize Judy's daughter. In addition, Dr. Berard had a significant amount of cash with him, about $1,000, and also a diary where he wrote down everything he forgot, including passwords. Judy was afraid that her husband could be robbed or that he simply got lost in a strange city. She contacted the police 3 times, sharing her fears and suspicions. She told law enforcement officers that Thomas had gone to Kelsey and even gave them the girl's address. She noted that she had already demonstrated her cruelty more than once and was unlikely to stop using the generosity of her trusting husband. Judy was convinced that something had happened to Tom after all. He did not return when he promised. The police visited Kelsey's house several times, but to no avail. There was no one there. Only during the last visit, they noticed some strange details. The lights were on in the windows, the blinds were open, and the mailbox was completely stuffed with letters. The front door was unlocked. Going inside, the cops found no one. Only the pungent smell of cleaning products wafting through the air seemed extremely suspicious to them. Deciding not to touch potential evidence, law enforcement officers left the house. Having contacted the owner of the dwelling, the police found out little. The man only confirmed the fact that someone had paid for 3 months' rent in advance, and that neither Kelsey nor Thomas were at home. Well, in light of these circumstances, the cops simply had no other choice. They obtained a search warrant for Kelsey's home, hoping to find at least some clues in this confusing story. On the morning of March 7, 2019 at 10:50 a.m., an event occurred that became a turning point in this tangled story. Some men with children were driving along a deserted road in the Nevada desert. Suddenly, they noticed a Mercedes parked in a strange place. But it was not this that caught their attention, but the broken window of the car. Without hesitation, the concerned citizens called the police. When the patrol arrived at the scene, the cops thoroughly examined the vehicle. The windows and doors were damaged as if someone had forcibly tried to get out from the inside. After starting the engine and opening the trunk, the police saw some items. But what alarmed them the most was the smell of decay emanating from there. Under the blanket lay a mutilated male body with signs of brutal violence. In my years, I've seen plenty of horrific scenes at crime scenes, but what they did to this poor soul shocked even me, a seasoned cop. The forensic experts who arrived soon began to carefully study the car. Inside, latex gloves and cleaning supplies were found. Someone was clearly trying to remove evidence. Blood traces were also found on the driver's seat, although it was not easy to establish what exactly happened there. However, the overall picture was quite obvious. It seemed that the victim was attacked right in the car, and then, barely alive or already dead, was shoved into the trunk. The examination showed that the poor man was beaten to death, having received numerous blows to the head with a blunt object. In addition, numerous bruises, cuts, and scratches were found on the body. A particularly eerie detail was the missing part of the ear. Judging by the wounds on his hands, the man had desperately tried to defend himself. But in vain, a series of powerful blows to the head left him no chance. The first thing the police found out was the name of the car owner. It turned out to be none other than Kelsey Turner. The cops immediately linked the disappearance of Dr. Berard with the found mutilated body. Having obtained a warrant, the investigators visited Kelsey's home with a search. Already on the spot, they found telling evidence. A bloody towel identical to the one lying in the trunk of a Mercedes, traces of blood on broken doors, and most interestingly, cleaning supplies. It seemed as if someone had desperately tried to wipe the bloody stains off the floor. On March 15, the police finally received permission to arrest the main suspect. 2 weeks later, Kelsey Turner, who was hiding with her son in California at the time, was detained by FBI agents. The boy was sent to the care of a foster family, and the negligent mother was officially charged with murder. Her last roommate, John, was also taken into custody. It seemed that everything was clear, only the details remained. However, a real breakthrough in the investigation was the testimony of Diana, a neighbor and an involuntary participant in those terrible events. The woman herself came to the police along with her lawyer. In exchange for a mitigation of punishment, she told the investigators in detail everything that actually happened that fateful evening. I must admit, after hearing her testimony, even I, an old detective, was stunned by the ruthlessness and cold-bloodedness of the criminals. The second day of Dr. Berard's visit to Kelsey in Vegas turned out to be fatal. Diana, as usual, was working at a local bar. Thomas and Kelsey came to pick her up after her shift. The doctor was driving, but he obviously had a poor sense of direction in the city and quickly got lost. Losing patience, Kelsey snatched his phone under the pretext of searching for a route. But having the device in her hands, she couldn't resist and began rummaging through Tom's messenger. And here she made an extremely unpleasant discovery. Among the messages were nude photos of her own mother, Samantha. Digging further, Kelsey found out shocking details. It turned out that her mother was also begging for money from the elderly psychiatrist. She must have touched him with some moving story from her difficult life, and the kind-hearted doctor, of course, fell for it. Upon learning about this, Kelsey went mad with rage. A barrage of insults and reproaches fell upon Thomas. The poor man was confused and did not know how to react to her frenzied attack. By some miracle, he still managed to get the car to the house without getting into an accident. But the adventures did not end there. At home, Kelsey continued to yell at Tom, calling him names. She threatened to expose his connection with her mother and ruin his reputation. To somehow hide from this verbal pressure, Thomas locked himself in her son's room. Fortunately, the boy was not at home that evening. He was staying overnight at a friend's place. However, Kelsey did not calm down. Now she was already demanding that Thomas pay a huge sum for her silence. The doctor could not stand it and slammed the door in anger. This sound infuriated John, who had been silently watching everything that was happening. Grabbing a baseball bat, he smashed the door of the room with a swing. Diana saw John rushing down the corridor like a mad beast. Then there was a dull thud, and a moment later she saw Thomas's body lying on the floor. A huge bruise was already swelling on his head. Puzzled by their own deed, John and Kelsey instantly fled, leaving the unconscious doctor to his fate. Diana rushed to help the poor man. She gave him water, tried to somehow bring him to his senses. Thomas barely realized what had happened. He was in deep shock. Diana understood that the man needed immediate medical attention. She wanted to take him to the hospital, but unfortunately, she did not know how to drive a car. Thomas was also unable to get behind the wheel. We had to wait for Kelsey and John. There was simply no one else to count on. But the couple was in no hurry to rescue their victim. On the contrary, the exhausted Thomas whispered a terrible thing to Diana. Most likely, these two were planning to kill him. A moment later, Kelsey returned. Cynically stating that she would take Tom to the hospital, she began hastily wiping away all traces of the attack. The frightened Diana rushed to wash the bloodied floor. At the same time, she heard Thomas desperately arguing with his tormentors in the garage. And then, through the noise, Kelsey's cold order to John reached her. "Hit him again." The girl rushed downstairs to stop the beast of a roommate. But alas, she did not make it in time. An innocent person was being brutally finished off right before her eyes, and no one was going to save the victim. Diana was in complete shock from what she saw. She froze in place, not knowing what to do next. Tears streamed down her face, but Kelsey did not give the girl even a minute to despair. Coldly ordering the subordinate to go back upstairs and erase the last traces of the crime, she herself began to carry the bloody body out of the house. Meanwhile, the police, called by one of the neighbors, were already banging on the door. Diana had every chance to stop this madness. It was enough just to open the door and tell the cops the truth. But the girl did not dare. She panicked and barricaded herself inside, hoping to wait out the danger. The next day, Kelsey took Thomas's mutilated body to the desert and left it in the trunk of his own car. Perhaps she hoped that in such a deserted place, exposure could be avoided, but she miscalculated. On March 21, Kelsey and her roommate John were finally arrested on suspicion of murder. The obstinate couple denied their involvement to the last, blaming each other. And here Diana's testimony played a key role. Thanks to a plea deal with the investigation, the girl was released on bail. Already in court, she fearlessly pointed to Kelsey and John as the direct killers of Thomas. The defenders of the defendants, of course, tried to tarnish the witness and downplay the significance of her testimony, but in vain. During the hearings, Kelsey always appeared in loose prison clothes, and no wonder she was in the last months of pregnancy with another, already third child. Who was the father of this baby remained a mystery. In the end, John surrendered first. He confessed to second-degree murder, admitting his part in the conspiracy. The court sentenced him to 45 years behind bars. Kelsey held out to the last, pretending to be an innocent victim of circumstances. Her own trial was scheduled for November 2022, but a moment before the start of the hearing, the woman suddenly changed her testimony. She also admitted guilt in second-degree murder. The sentence is 25 years in prison. Already in the cell, Kelsey gave birth to a daughter who was instantly transferred to the guardianship authorities. It seems that the child was lucky she will not see her insidious mother until she becomes an adult, and let that one rot behind bars. The investigation established that Kelsey was a clever swindler and a pathological liar. She cynically used the kind-hearted Thomas for money, and when she realized that the elderly doctor would no longer be her source of income, she decided to get rid of him. Kelsey's accusations of pedophilia against Dr. Berard turned out to be completely unfounded. The police thoroughly examined the contents of his phone and other electronic devices, but did not find any evidence to support these horrific allegations. Yes, there were photos of naked women in his mobile phone's memory, but there were no images of children or minors among them. The investigators also unearthed the fact of intimate correspondence between Thomas and Kelsey with quite explicit photos. But since both were adults, these materials were considered inappropriate to be presented in court as evidence of the doctor's guilt. It is difficult to unequivocally assess the actions of Dr. Berard. On the one hand, his relationships with young women and obsession with charity seem strange, to say the least, especially for a respectable man well over 70. But despite everything, Thomas was a kind, sensitive person who sincerely sought to help those in need, and his professional merits and good reputation are undeniable. Until the very end, his wife Judy tried to protect the trusting Thomas from Kelsey's insidious encroachments. She repeatedly begged her husband to sever all ties with this girl. She felt that she was manipulating and using the elderly doctor for her own selfish purposes. Unfortunately, the man in love completely lost his mind and did not listen to her wise advice. And now I would like to draw your attention to another tragic aspect of this eerie story. To the fate of Kelsey's unfortunate children, a boy and 2 girls, whom she gave birth to from different men. Babies who were unlucky enough to be born to this irresponsible and cynical woman. She always put her own desires and whims above the needs and well-being of her offspring. Thanks to Diana's testimony, it became known that Kelsey used children as a lever of influence on others. She asked for money allegedly for their maintenance, but she spent it on entertainment and drugs. She led a dissolute life, dragging the kids through dubious rented apartments and dens. Are these normal conditions for the growth and development of children? It's strange that social services did not take them away earlier. I'm afraid to imagine what traumas such upbringing will turn into for these kids. After all, they never had a chance to experience maternal warmth and genuine care. Their short life is continuous poverty, instability, and arbitrariness of an insidious mother. And the worst thing is that Kelsey's care was cut short in the most insidious way through the brutal murder of a person. Not the best example to follow. You know, such high-profile cases always make you wonder what is going on in the heads of such Kelseys. What pushes these young women to embark on a bloody path and drag the innocent with them? One thing I can say for sure, at the heart of their actions lies vile selfishness and the inability to take responsibility for their lives. They are not ready to be mothers, but they give birth to children. They do not want to work, but they strive for luxury and wealth. They manipulate, lie, and parasitize on the kindness of others. And when the victim shows character, they get rid of them at any cost. Thinking about Kelsey Turner, I can't get rid of the feeling of bitterness and disappointment. This woman is a prime example of what a mother should not be. She completely forgot about her most important duty to take care of the well-being and safety of her own children. Instead of creating a stable and loving environment for them, Kelsey turned the lives of her offspring into complete chaos. She dragged them through various boyfriends and dubious dwellings, while she herself was drinking and using drugs at this time. The kids lived in an atmosphere of constant fear, neglect, and deprivation. But even this did not prompt the negligent mother to come to her senses and change her behavior. She continued to make irresponsible decisions, obeying only her own impulsive desires, and she used the children as a lever for pressure and manipulation of others, including Dr. Berard. Tragically, in the end, even Judy could not protect the poor kids from the devastating influence of their mother. Social services also lacked the determination to take them out of the toxic environment. One can only imagine what traumas and complexes such upbringing inflicted on them for life. In this bloody drama, Dr. Thomas Berard found himself a hostage to his own good intentions. Despite some controversial traits of his personality, he was a kind and sensitive person who sincerely sought to help those in need. He did not deserve such a cruel and untimely death at the hands of an insidious fraudster whom he unreservedly trusted. This case has become a chilling confirmation of the old truth. Sometimes excessive kindness, generosity, and trust turn against the benefactor himself. Not everyone who reaches out for help is guided by pure thoughts. Some, like Kelsey, only need money and the opportunity to parasitize on other people's resources. Of course, it's easy to judge the victim from the height of lived years and one's own experience, like it was necessary to think with your head, not your heart. Do not succumb to the manipulation and threats of a scammer. But Thomas, it seems, simply could not do otherwise. His humanity, sincerity, and compassion for the disadvantaged became both his greatest virtue and his fatal mistake. Now we can only hope that Kelsey's orphan children will find comfort in a new loving family, that some kind people will take them under their wing and give them the peace, comfort, and care that these babies have been deprived of since birth. Perhaps this will somewhat compensate them for the traumatic past and help them grow into worthy individuals. As for Dr. Thomas Berard, he will undoubtedly remain forever in the memory of those he managed to help during his lifetime. His bright soul, selflessness, and desire to give good will definitely not be forgotten. And although these amazing qualities eventually ruined Thomas, they also turned him into a real guardian angel for many unfortunate and disadvantaged people. They say that true kindness does not mean gratitude or recognition. It does not expect anything in return, but simply does the right thing at the call of the heart. Probably this is exactly what our deceased doctor was, a generous soul in a soulless world of human cruelty and self-interest. And although his earthly path ended too early and tragically, I want to believe that there, in the afterlife, Thomas finally found the peace and love that he sometimes lacked during his lifetime. And we, the cops, will just do our job. We will punish the guilty so that the death of this bright man is not in vain. It's hard to put an end to such high-profile cases, because despite the arrests and trials, some bitter injustice remains, as if evil once again prevailed, and we again could not prevent a bloody denouement. But despite everything, I believe that every good deed, every rescue, and every punished abomination makes this world at least a little better and safer. And even if we are not given to eradicate all the evil, at least we do not allow it to prevail completely. The story of Dr. Berard will become another sad but important brick in the wall of human memory. A warning for some and an inspiration for others. A reminder that evil is always near, but good does not disappear either. The main thing is not to lose humanity and compassion, even in the face of the most terrible trials.